Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weeks.
How's it? It's Josh Lee Kwai.
And today we are talking about powerful cards in Commander.
Very powerful cards.
Very powerful. Like, there's a lot of powerful synergistic cards in Commander, but there are some cards that if you put in a Commander deck, it feels like they actually shift the full power level of a deck, even if you just add one or two of these cards into your deck.
Yeah, and you know, the power level discussion is controversial. People have disagreements about how to do it. I think you and I aren't even on the same page about how it all works. And so a lot of people just see a single card and make a judgment about the power level of the deck based upon that one card. And so we're going to kind of dive into like how warranted is that. Like if you see a Mana Crypt, does that mean that the deck cannot be a 5 or a 6 or whatever on the power scale? What cards do, in our estimation, sort of vastly change the power level or not? So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm excited about it. Yeah,
we're going to talk about a lot of sweet, powerful cards today. If you want to pick up any of those, you can do so while supporting the show by going to cardkingdom.com/command. Card Kingdom has a huge selection of Magic cards. So every time you're building a deck, every time you just have a little bit of money that you want to spend, you can go to Card Kingdom and get all of the cards you're looking for in one place. Plus, with Card Kingdom, you know that they're going to ship it professionally to you. So the cards that you ordered are going to show up in the condition that you ordered them in. They're going to put them in a little case. They're going to wrap them safely. And if anything goes wrong in shipping, you know that they have the professionalism and the team to handle all of that for you. We trust Card Kingdom with all of our card shopping needs for building decks for Game Nights Live, and all of the decks that we build here at the Command Zone come from Card Kingdom. So support the show, pick up some sweet cards, go over to cardkingdom.com/command.
And of course, once you get those cards, you don't want them to be damaged in any way, especially speaking of Mana Crypt, if you got one of those from Lost Caverns of Ixalan or something like that. So you want to protect that stuff. ULTRAPRO is the game accessories brand that we here at the Command Zone trust our own collections to. If you go to ultrapro.com/command, you can find all kinds of awesome products like sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, wall scrolls, dice. If you need it on your game board or in your game room, they've got it. And they've probably got lots of different versions with lots of different like pieces of art from Magic's history and things like that available to you. Pieces of art from the newest set. They have the licensing agreement with Wizards. They have tons of deals on their website. Again, ultrapro.com/command. So if you want to protect your game pieces and make your game board or game room look awesome, ULTRAPRO's the way to go.
They're the best. I teased it a little bit already, but we are reminding you that we're having a Game Nights Live at MagicCon Chicago. It's February 23rd on Friday at 4 p.m. We are having a big live Commander game featuring us and also the Professor.
Yeah, it's his first ever appearance in Game Nights Live. You do not want to miss it. He's very excited about it. He's never been to a MagicCon before. I like what you said there, Rachel. The Game Nights Live performance is on the Friday, which is the first day of the show. And we hear this from people all the time. They show up on Saturday, Sunday. They're like, when's Game Nights Live? And we're like, we already did it. So we're just trying to get that message out there. If you are going to attend the con, it's a great weekend. We're going to be there all weekend. Obviously, we'll be there the other days. But the Game Nights Live, specifically, that performance is on Friday. So make sure you try and get there on Friday because we're biased, but I do think it's the best part of the show. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. So if you can at all catch the show, it is worth that extra day for sure.
Plus, it doesn't cost any extra. We get a lot of questions about if you need tickets or if you need to reserve a seat. Nope, it's first come, first serve. As long as you can get into the hall on Friday, you can come see the show. Just get there a little early. Make sure that you get your seats.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's get into it. Oh, wait. The final way you can support the show is directly over at patreon.com/commandzone. There's tons of perks to being a patron. You get access to game nights and extra turns a day early, plus no ads. Very cool. Plus, we shout out one lucky patron every single podcast episode. And this one is dedicated to
Andrew James Ringrose.
You rock.
Andrew, you definitely rock. Got three names like me.
Yeah. Ringrose, too.
It's really almost four names.
Almost four.
I have four names. I got a middle name, too.
Do you?
Yeah, Andrew, you're not so cool. You're pretty cool, Andrew. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Is there another? The big question is, does it go between the Lee and the Kwai, or the Josh and the Lee?
Oh, this is interesting.
Have we ever said that?
I don't think I've ever said that. Lee Kwai is my last name, and it's just 2 words.
Yeah.
Josh is my first name. I do have a middle name, so
it goes in between there.
Yeah, exactly. So people mix that up. They think Lee's my middle name. It's not. Nope. All right.
Let's get into the main topic.
Okay. All right, and now let's go to the end step where we talk about something cool outside the world of magic. No.
We'll reveal Josh's middle name at the end of the episode. Stick around. Oh, man. Okay, so I feel like in Casual Commander, like when we think about Commander, we think about precons, and then there's CDH, and then there's this big muck in between that is Casual Commander.
Yeah.
There's like, and then there... Within that big muck, there's this invisible line that is like fair Casual Commander, and then there's more broken, like I've heard it called like Turbo Commander.
Optimal, I've heard it a lot.
Yeah. Like it's just more supercharged decks. They're usually more expensive. They're a little faster.
But they're not
CDH.
Yeah.
They're not doing like the best strategies in the game, but they're using more powerful cards than probably the average Casual Commander player, which is sort of below this line. So the cards that we're talking about today, I think sort of give you an estimation of where that line is. It is very... it depends on your playgroup, and everybody has sort of a different idea of where that line can be drawn. And often that line is sort of drawn in salt. Because people are like, your deck is more powerful. It's above the line. And you're like, no, it's not. It's below that line.
Right.
And so it's a very tricky thing to talk about. So everything that we're talking about today is relative, but we're trying to give you an idea of what cards sort of shift up the power level and maybe push you above that line into a more powerful Casual Commander, like a Turbo Casual.
Yeah, and as with everything, it depends is the real answer to this question. But I think at least sharing our thinking on how we sort of tackle this subject matter when we're building our own decks and thinking about power level and where we want to sit will hopefully help some people out there come to some sort of maybe they can codify a little bit how they think about it. I know it's been helpful for me, and I feel at least pretty good about my own decks and where I know they sit. Like, I rarely sit down at a game and I've misjudged what my deck is. And sometimes, I feel like maybe my opponents have misjudged what their decks are, but also sometimes it's just impossible to tell with one game. So a lot of times I just give them the benefit of the doubt. It's like, they said their deck's a 6. It's performing very well. Seems probably like it might be above that. But at the same time, maybe they just got a good draw. And, I can't tell from one game really. So as always, and I feel like I say this all the time, try and give people a break.
Yes.
But yeah, if we want to sort of talk about how we're going to refer to numbers here, and it's hard not to, on that 1 to 10 power scale, I tend to think of a precon these days as a 5.
Yeah.
And like the original precons they used to come out with are closer to a 3. So over the years, the precons have gotten better because they started in 2011, 2012. And, we are 12 years past that. So somewhere in the middle years, they're probably closer to a 4, and they've, I think, come to like about a 5 these days. And then a mildly upgraded precon, or what would be the equivalent of like you've changed out 15 or so cards in a precon.
And that, like, one of our budget upgrades, I would consider a 6.
Yeah.
Like, you're not upgrading 15 cards and you're adding mana crypts and
right.
the cards we're talking about today.
Yeah.
We're talking about 15 cards and like you maybe put another $50 into it.
You probably look through your collection and whatever you happen to have, you kind of added in. And again, we're not talking about the super most powerful cards in the format here. And a 7 is a deck that you have changed out enough that it's not even really the precon anymore. It maybe has like the precon commander and less than 10 to 15 of the cards that were originally in it besides lands, and you've really done a lot of work on it, and that's a pretty big step up, I think. And I know everybody jokes that everybody says their deck is a 7, and I do believe that like 80 or 85% of the decks in the format are 7s. Like they can play together and they're about the same power level. And then the one step past that is what we were talking about was maybe supercharged or optimized, I like to say, which is, okay, now I've probably built this deck from the ground up. There's probably almost nothing left from the precon, and I've added a lot of very powerful cards.
Yeah.
There could be a mana crypt in an 8. Mana Crypt doesn't push you necessarily towards your CDH deck, but that is probably the most powerful that like quote unquote casual decks kind of get. They might dip into the very low 9s, but once you're in a 9, that to me is CEDH, but not top tier CEDH
Yeah,
decks.
like second tier or off meta, maybe dated CEDH decks that still are trying to compete on that timeline, but aren't necessarily updated to like the absolute current meta.
Yeah.
And then 10 is of course like a top CEDH where you've checked the lists and that's the list.
If you have a 10, you've gone online.
And you know it's a 10.
You know it's a 10 because it is meant to be as powerful as decks can kind of get in the format. And I like to think of power level like a deck can sort of reasonably play with decks that are within one step of it. So a 6 can play with a 5 and it can play with a 7. Is it advantaged against the 7s? No, but it can play and it won't feel like this is not a game at all.
Right.
And a 7 can play with an 8 and can play with a 6, but against a 9, it's definitely like doesn't really have a chance. Now, that's not to say CDH is a weird thing where I've definitely played in pods where like people are playing 3 CDH decks and I have my Vile Smasher Thrasios deck, which is an 8. And it has a chance of that deck in that pod because the other 3 decks keep each other in check enough that the one deck can sort of maybe sneak in and even get a win or do something weird that CDH decks don't know how to deal with.
Prepared for, yeah.
Just because you actually make it to turn 10 because they stop each other from doing everything. But that doesn't mean your deck could like really compete on the level that they're competing on. If it was like 3 8s and a 10, the 10's probably going to win because it's just going to combo out so early and they won't be able to stop it.
They just can't interact on that level.
Yeah, so I like to think of it. I think in the old days, the power levels were a little different. The format was a little slower, and you could play maybe 2 steps away, but it's contracted now where I think you can play about 1 step away. Like, yeah, an 8 can't play with a 10, but it would have a chance against a 9, and it really shouldn't be playing against a 6. It'll just be a pub stomping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Power level discussion.
Yeah. So the cards that we're talking about today we're going to talk about like the difference between a 6 and an 8. Like that's sort of the power level difference that we're talking about. Between an 8 and a 10, totally different cards. But between those like lower casual decks and the higher casual decks, these cards are going to be the ones that make the difference. And it's like having 1 to 2 of them in your 6 and, 10 plus of them in your 8 is where we're drawing lines. So
since most decks sit around 7, I think this is applicable to most decks.
Yeah.
Sort of knowing like, am I really, where exactly am I? And it's a continuum, right? You could be like a 7.5. Like we just talk about them in these ways. And again, it's more art than science too.
Exactly. A lot of these cards have vibes.
Yeah.
We're reading the vibes.
Okay.
But that's part of the discussion. So the first category that we're going to talk about, the first group of cards, I think is going to be the most obvious to people. And I think it is maybe the biggest factor in pushing your deck from a 6 to an 8. And that's, of course, fast mana.
Yep.
There's a lot of different kinds of fast mana in the format. I think the most recognizable is something we've alluded to a lot, which is mana rocks.
Yep. Mana Crypt specifically, we've already mentioned a number of times. And that definitely is a card, I believe, that feels like if it is in your deck, it's difficult for your deck to be a 6.
Yeah.
It's just that card alone is so powerful that when you draw it early, it totally changes how your deck plays to a degree that makes it like pretty difficult for, an upgraded precon to feel even like it's an upgraded precon. It feels more like, it's a level or 2 above that.
Yeah, an interesting thing here is Sol Ring is fast mana, right? Sol Ring is 100% a fast mana piece. It's a mana rock. But because Sol Ring is in most decks, 95% of decks, right? At least. Yep. It doesn't really register on this. Like, I don't think a Sol Ring moves the needle of your deck necessarily. But adding a Mana Crypt changes the percentage of your deck that has fast mana in it. So it just means that, like, you're dedicating 2 slots to very powerful fast mana pieces.
Yeah.
Where, like, Sol Ring, I don't know, you sort of expect Sol Ring to happen in Commander. But Mana Crypt is that second level where you're like, oh, you're really trying to go fast.
Yeah, and the difference between 1 of a thing and 2 of a thing is twice as much of a thing as you had before. 2x is a lot, and so that's just twice as many times when you're going to get off to a fast start. And then you also have the possibility to do something that a deck with just Sol Ring can't, which is get both of them in your opening hand, in which case you have a crazy start to a game, which is going to happen some percentage of the time. So your percentage, like crazy starts, just goes up. And I think that's really one of the reasons, or the biggest reason why Mana Crypt on its own, I do believe, is a card that single-handedly should be factored into the power level of your deck.
Right. In addition to Mana Crypt, there's a lot of like 0 mana rocks. Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond are the 2 that I think of that are definitely if they're in your deck, I consider them a higher tier casual deck. Both of them pitch a card to give you a 0 mana rock that tap for 1 mana of any color.
Yeah.
And that's, again, more slots dedicated to fast mana just means that you're more likely to have a fast start.
I don't know. I'd be interested to hear. I don't think Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond fit in the exact same spot as Mana Crypt, in that if you didn't have Mana Crypt, you just have Soul Ring and 2 mana rocks, regular stuff.
Yeah.
And then you have a Chrome Mox in your deck also, but it's just a one-off. That doesn't feel like that deck is a ton more powerful than, the version of that deck that just has a 2 mana rock in that same slot. Because you are down the card, and you don't have enough redundancy for the effect for it to really be like this huge payoff. Because even those crazy starts where you go, I have a Chrome Mox in my opening hand, your deck's not necessarily equipped to take advantage of it. It's when you have Chrome Mox, Mox Diamond, Mana Crypt. It does indicate that maybe you have those other things and your deck is very powerful, but I think it's possible to add a Chrome Mox to a deck, and I'm not saying everybody should do this, and not really increase the power level that much.
If you see a player play a Chrome Mox, do you assume they have a Mana Crypt?
I assume their deck is powerful.
Yeah.
And if they told me before the game, hey, my deck's a 6, and they go turn 1 Chrome Mox, I got to be honest. I sort of
alarm bells.
Yeah, I sort of don't believe you. I'm sort of going like, that doesn't mean I think you're lying. I just think this person's gauge of their numbers are different than mine.
Right.
And so in my mind, your deck is already a 7 and could possibly be an 8 just from playing that card.
Right.
But it is possible to play that
sure.
card in a low power deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just unlikely.
For sure. And I think if you're running those kind of cards, you need to be aware that they are going to set off alarm bells in your opponent's head, especially if you told them that it's a 6.
That's a really good point. I think if somebody's like, all things being equal, I have an early creature out, I'm going to attack the player with the Chrome Mox. That's fair. I don't think you have any leg to stand on if you're going to complain about it.
No.
Even though you're like, hey, listen, my deck actually sucks.
And you're like,
My deck's all about artwork, and the Chrome Mox just happens to fit in with the theme of the artwork. Hey, that's really good. I'm
totally
very proud of you. I'm still hitting you for 3.
Still have a Chrome Mox.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to hit you. Yeah. I think also it's not traditionally a mana rock, but it's a repeatable source of mana that gives you more mana than it creates. So I think we're going to consider Carpet of Flowers also in this section.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I don't run Carpet of Flowers in any casual decks right now. Because it does the same thing that fast mana does, where it just shoots you into the into turn 3, turn 4 earlier than most of my decks need to be.
When it does its thing, it is similar to a Soul Ring or a Mana Crypt, right? It is a thing that costs you 1 mana that often creates 2, 3, or more mana every single turn, and that is just on that power level. I agree. I have Carpet Flowers in some decks, but I won't call it's not anything that's below an 8. I won't put it in a deck that I want to be a 7, right? Like if I say that deck's a 7, it couldn't have Mana Crypt, it couldn't have Carpet of Flowers in it. Yeah. And I don't believe I have any 7s that have the Moxen either.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. There's some that are on the cusp that are interesting, and they are also Moxen. And these Moxen means a mana rock that's cost 0. That's what it's come to mean. So there's Mox Opal and Mox Amber. And both of these, neither of us really think that they're as good as Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond, and they sort of fit in a slightly different category.
Yeah, these are build-around Moxes that don't, they're going to give you more mana, but, Mox Opal requires that you have 3 artifacts. Yep. So it's like a build-around artifact rock, and it also means if you play it on turn 1, it's not likely to make you mana unless you're a designated, ton of artifact decks. And then Mox Amber requires you to have a legendary creature in play.
Yeah.
So it's harder to give you the mana on those early turns where fast mana is really, really dangerous.
Yeah, it won't help you cast your commander for the most part, which is kind of a pretty big drawback, right?
Yeah.
You don't get your commander out early with Mox Amber. Obviously, there are some exceptions to that rule.
Yeah.
I would be interested, if I'm building a deck and Rogue Rock is in my command zone, though, does Mox Amber become a thing where, I can't have a Rogue Rock deck that I'm telling people is a 7 if I have a Mox Amber in it?
I had a Rogue Rock deck that had Mox Amber in it, and it was just it was Rogue Rock or Chroma, which I played on game nights, and I think it had a Mox Amber in it because I was like, look at this cool synergy.
Yeah.
And it didn't have any other Moxes, and it didn't have any, but I was like, this makes me gives me a reward for having this commander that doesn't do anything. So I played it, and it was just to get creatures out so I could hit people a little bit faster, but it was that and Soul Ring. So it had the fast mana package, and Rogue Rock really gave me that because it also had, I think it had Springleaf Drum and some of those other cheap artifacts that take advantage of having a 0-mana commander. So it did have some pretty serious acceleration, but the Wincon was Angels.
So you think your deck could still be qualified as a 7?
I think it's probably a 7. I wouldn't call it an 8. It doesn't interact on that level.
Yeah, it's just interesting because Rogark specifically means that Mox Amber is guaranteed to be...
It's guaranteed a Mox, which is very powerful.
Yeah, exactly. So it's about redundancy of the effect, right? Like,
for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. The next category, of course, is mana dorks. So the difference between rocks and dorks. Dorks are creatures. Rocks are usually artifacts or enchantments, I guess, in the case of Carpet of Flowers.
Yeah. But they don't have power and toughness and can't be killed by destroy creature spells. Rocks and dorks can.
And they don't have summoning sickness.
Yeah, good point.
So
Big deal. Yeah.
So mana dorks, of course, the most powerful ones are going to be your 1-mana ones. Those are your Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystic. But I think this category also includes, Bloom Tender is probably the most powerful in terms of like 1 and 2 mana ones.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's the biggest swing in mana.
Yeah.
But also this will include like your Circle of Dreams Druid, which is a Gaia's Cradle on a creature. That's a huge amount of acceleration on turn 4.
Yeah. But it costs so much that it's like hard to put it in the same category. What about like Birds of Paradise or Llanowar?
Yeah. The 1-mana ones I think are what we're talking about primarily, but that also includes your, I think, Circle of Dreams Druid and that kind of thing.
How do you feel about these in comparison to the mana rocks? I mean, I don't think either of us is going to say like you put a Birds of Paradise in your deck and it changes
as a Mox.
It changes the power level of that deck.
No, that's the interesting thing is like Birds of Paradise is just fixing and it's a rock and it works 1 turn slower. Rocks are a full turn faster than mana dorks.
Yeah. Big deal.
But we're also talking about density here. Like, I think the more mana dorks you have, the faster your deck wants to go, the faster your deck goes, of course. Like, if you have 1 or 2 mana dorks, you're like, okay, that's like ramp in a creature deck. If you have 5 or 6 mana dorks, you're shifting towards an elf ball deck, which is like a very powerful, very snowball-y strategy.
Yeah, it's interesting because we always talk about on the show advocating a certain amount of ramp pieces in a deck, and now we're in the 12-ish range, I think is what we're these days saying you want. But for the power level of your deck, one of the sort of rubrics we use is what turn is my deck normally ready to win on? And having a lot of mana available to you generally means you're ready to try and win earlier. So the density of sort of 1-mana dork. Specifically 1 mana, I'd say more than the rest, although you mentioned Bloom Tender, which I think is a little bit of an exception. Yeah. But yeah, if you have a deck, you and I have the same deck, let's say, and I'm like, I'm going to add 5 cards to it. And you're like, I'm going to add 5 cards to it. And I add 5 Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Birds of Paradise, Bloom Tender, something else, Avacyn's Pilgrim, whatever. And you say, I add 5 to 7 drop creatures that are fun and going to attack them. My deck probably went up a power level or close to it, and your deck stayed the same or got worse.
Or got slower, yeah. Mine probably slowed down a turn while yours probably sped up a turn. Yeah. Because you've added 5. So your odds of having one of these on turn 1 is huge. Yeah. It gives you 3 mana on turn 2. It shoots you into the late game a lot earlier when you up that density.
Now, the same scenario, I add 1 Birds of Paradise, and you add 1 5 to 7 CMC creature.
Doesn't really shift the power level all that
Our
much.
decks are basically the same as they were before and haven't changed. So I think for the mana dorks, it's about density, kind of similar to the Moxen almost, where a one-off thing I think is fine. It really is about having a lot. Redundancy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's changing the consistency of your deck.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is an interesting... I guess we have a question here. How many mana dorks do you think? Where's that line? I said 5 as just a number I'm throwing out.
I think 5 is about right. I mean, like you're 20% to have one in your opening. No, they take up 5 out of 100 is 5%.
Yep.
You draw 7 cards. What's the likelihood you have one in your oopening hand?
It's like 50-50, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got a soul ring.
And you draw an 8th.
Yeah, I think it's higher. I think.
Yeah.
I think. If you took a normal deck with a normal amount of ramp and added 5, I'm assuming there's some already there, so it did change the power level. But let's say your deck has 0 ramp in it, and you're like, I need ramp because,
And you had 5.
Rachel and Josh and Jimmy always say add ramp to my deck. So what am I going to do? And you pull out your mana dorks, and you're like, I currently have a soul ring, that's it as ramp, and I put 5 in. I think you're not quite to the point where that density is so high. I think if you're like probably 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, once you have that many 1-mana dorks or 2-mana dorks, you significantly sped yourself up, and you're likely to have one in your opening hand most games.
Yeah. I think the big difference between like these 1-mana dorks and the 2-mana signets that we usually talk about is, of course, how much, like what turn they come down and what turn they start working. Mana rocks come down on turn 2, but don't really give you additional mana until turn 3, because unless you have like a 1-drop in your hand, which you may or may not.
Yeah. And then even like a signet wouldn't necessarily even be able to tap on turn 2 to cast the 1-drop. Yeah.
So having the 3 mana on turn 2 means you've already ramped a whole turn earlier.
Yeah.
So that's a huge difference between rocks and dorks. Of course, there's like high risk, high reward, because if there's a board wipe, sayonara ramp.
Yeah.
But
it sets you back even farther.
Yeah, I think 6 or 7 is probably where I'm like, this is an elf deck where we're really accelerating with creatures.
Assuming you've still got a few other ramp pieces and you're still at that 12 level or so. Yeah, okay.
The next category is rituals.
Yeah.
Which is single-use sources of mana. So these always give you more mana than they cost if you're using them.
You're sort of trading a card generally, and you're going to see we're going to use that term loosely, but generally you lose the card in exchange for mana, right? So a Dark Ritual is the most classic of these, and sort of, I guess Black Lotus was probably actually the first one, and I would classify Black Lotus as a ritual, but Dark Ritual is where we get the word ritual, and it's just an instant, you pay 1 black, you get 3 black, and so you've traded that card advantage for 2 extra black mana, because you obviously put 1 in and got 3 back, so you're up 2. So you can see with the Lotus example how we can kind of expand the definition to include, cards that are not technically instants or sorceries. In fact, you have Mana Vault on the list, and I think I had it originally in Mana Rocks, and you moved it down to Ritual, and I was like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of decks, you see Mana Vault come down. It costs 1 mana and generates 3. And yes, you can untap it, but there are many, many games where you never do. You just use it the one time to get your commander out early or go off on a turn. And it's obviously better with synergy if you can untap it, and I get that. But it really is often a ritual. So it's smart to put it in this category and think about it that way.
Yeah, I think people think about Mana Vault wrong. Like they think about it as a mana rock, and you're like, unless you have a plan, like you're going to sack it or you're going to bounce it and replay it or something, this is single use.
Yeah. Which doesn't make it bad.
No.
Just be
it's very good.
Eyes open about it.
Yeah. You just know it's not Mana Crypt, which is 2 mana every turn. This is 3 mana now. You have to spend 4 mana or some other amount of mana to get more mana out of it later. So this is going to be your Jeweled Lotus, Grim Monolith, and Basalt Monolith, all either cost less than they make and don't untap, or you have to sacrifice them to do it.
Yeah, and also the ability to sort of pay mana now and save it till next turn is what Basalt and Grim Monolith do. So you can almost think of it as like a delayed Dark Ritual.
It banks it, yeah.
Yeah, so you bank it, and you're going to get 1 use out of it. Mana Vault often gets used that way. Play it now, don't tap it this turn, tap it next turn, and now I get 3 extra mana in true, not just 2 extra mana that I sort of net from it,
Yeah. So these are interesting because they're not as... To me, they're not as dangerous as Mana Rocks because they don't give you a repeatable value, and you do sort of have to be able to use them.
Yep.
Like they're not something you can just throw in your deck and they'll be good.
Right.
If you don't have the card advantage to keep up with using these, then they cost you a card and they gave you a little value. But if you didn't take advantage of it, then you didn't get the value out of it you're supposed to.
Yep.
So they are a little bit more build around. But these kinds of cards indicate to me that this deck is designed to go as fast as possible because we're spending a card to go fast.
And traditionally, fast decks are aggro decks, and what they're trying to do is win the game before card advantage matters.
Right.
Card advantage is a longer game play where you're just saying, as the course of the game goes on, we're going to slowly whittle away each other's resources, and eventually I'll have more to do than you because I have more cards. And this is that opposite plan, which is totally viable, right? Like, as long as everybody signed up for it, there's no value judgment on it, but this is the opposite plan. It was like, I'm going to just hit you before you're ready for it, and I can probably knock you out. And so what if you have 20 cards in your hand? 20 cards don't mean nothing if you're dead.
They're not on the board.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one here that we've talked about that stands out for me is Jeweled Lotus.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the mana crypt of this section to me, where I do believe that a Jeweled Lotus in your deck does intrinsically change the power level of your deck. Like, it's hard for me to imagine a deck that's a 6 that has a Jeweled Lotus. Not that it's impossible, but just the fact that, like, that's a big difference, right? 3 turns. My commander comes out 3 turns early. And obviously we're talking about it in its best case scenario, but the variance of like being able to do that some amount of games, something like 10% of games, you'll draw it in the first 10 cards, which is the first 3 turns. And if you got a 5 or 6 CMC commander, Korvold coming out that early is a lot different. Yeah. And even the ability to sort of, it's not dead later either. The ability to like recast.
Especially in Korvold.
Yeah, exactly. The ability to recast your commander later and just this pays for the tax and you can kind of do it out of nowhere is value. So I believe that one sits in a little bit of a different spot than the other ones just because, it just feels more powerful.
The rest of them are sort of how you use them, or again, the density of them. If you have a deck full of rituals, now we're a storm deck. Now we're operating one big turn, and hopefully that big turn is significantly earlier than people are dealing with you, which generally means you're a 7, minimally, probably an 8, if you're doing some kind of storm strategy.
I can't imagine a functional storm deck at
a
6.
7? At 6? Oh my god.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's like a spell slinger deck, which is usually based on like huge enchantments.
But at a 6, you can't be truly storming.
Right.
Yeah, I just can't imagine it. Yeah, I think you're totally right. If you're storming, then you're at least a 7.
I would think so.
Yeah.
And 7, we're talking about like you're running a lot of acceleration pieces. And we have sort of like a cusp section of this one, which are cards that you see and you're like, those are very powerful, but aren't necessarily like, okay, there's no way this is a 6.
Right.
And that for me is Basalt Monolith, which is you're spending 3 and you're banking 3 later. Like, yep, that's for one big turn, but I don't know. It might have something to do with Basalt Monolith is significantly cheaper, like value-wise, like dollar-wise than Grim Monolith.
Yep. And Mana Vault too.
And Mana Vault. Oh my gosh.
We'll talk, I think, near the end about the effect that the price of cards have on this, because it definitely does. I think it's impossible to remove that. So the cost of a card is sort of tied to the power level of it in some ways, and of course your brain can't help but factor it in a little bit. Yeah.
It's also 3 mana, so it like accelerates you on turn 4.
Yep.
If you haven't ramped before the hand,
turn
unless
4,
you
can have
Dark
7,
Ritual,
right?
Basalt Monolith, then you untap with 4. You're like, okay, well that's scary.
It's pretty good,
but
you're down 2 cards.
You're down 2 cards. Yeah. So it's Basalt Monolith doesn't scare me as much as a Grim Monolith or, of course, a Jeweled Lotus.
It's interesting. If I see Basalt Monolith, I think, oh, you're going to combo with it in some way.
It's a combo
so
piece,
it does scare me, but not because
in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. Some other rituals that if we see them, I think it would scare us are things like Simian Spirit Guide and Elvish Spirit Guide. And these are the cards that you can discard from your hand to make a mana.
Exile them.
Exile them from your hand. So you're trading cards straight up for 1 mana.
1 mana.
Yeah. But that's not actually that powerful of effect.
In Commander, yeah.
It just denotes that your deck, if you have the chutzpah or whatever to put that in your deck, then I think your deck is probably very scary because that 1 mana means so much to you. What are you doing with it? You must be doing something incredible.
Yeah.
Because I've never seen a casual deck that's just like, discard an Elvish Spirit Guide to cast, my commander 1 turn early, and I'm not doing anything broken for the rest of the game.
They're getting Winota out is what's happening.
Yeah,
those are very, very powerful cards, and like Lotus Petal does exactly the same thing, right? It's 1 card for 0 mana that gives you 1 mana of any color. Those kind of cards, you're like, oh
yeah. If I see that. It just, again, it's not that card's powerful. It just implies, certain power. Okay, there's 2 that we talked about in red, and this next card, I actually, similar to Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus, I don't have in any decks. Mana Crypt, I have in a couple, but again, I would never call a deck below an 8, I wouldn't put a Mana Crypt in any deck that's 7 or below. If a Mana Crypt's in it, it's got to be 8.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel the same way about this next card, which made me think we should put it on the list.
It's a bit of a hot take.
Yeah. Jessica's Will is a card that I start taking out of my decks that I wanted to call 7s. And just, if it's in there, it has to be at least an 8 in my head.
I don't feel the same way about Jessica's Will, but I do wonder if it's wishful thinking, because this card it's so fun to cast. It's so fun to cast Jessica's Will. You're like, I draw 3 cards and I make 6 mana, and what can I do with that?
Yeah, and then I cast the 3 cards that
you're like, wow, that was incredible. But it definitely, that is the kind of card that sneaks its way into every single red deck if you don't put the cap on it. And it when it gets cast, you're like, oh no. So it has that sort of feeling that makes you go, all right, well, I guess we're playing that way.
It never feels like a Jessica's Will gets cast where it doesn't just immediately
tilt the scales,
tilt the game, right? It's just immediately that player, they're either going to win or everybody's going to team up and stop them. But that is just, that's the way. You almost never see a Jessica's Will cast where it's just like, then game continues kind of as normal. And the fact that it's 3 mana and has that effect is what it feels like a 6 mana spell. It feels so powerful. And there's those games where every once in a while you get 21 mana, like somebody's drawn a million cards. You get 12 mana, Sometimes, of course, the worry is sometimes you'd only get 4 or 5, but that almost never happens. You usually have a player in your game that's got 6 or 7.
I think the interesting thing about Jessica's Will as a ritual is we think of like you spend a card, you make some mana. Jessica's Will, you make some mana and you get cards.
3!
You're up 2 cards.
It's insane.
Like you're up 2 cards and usually up mana. So it feels like a free effect that you're just like, I just drew 3 cards for free.
And the impulsive draw nature of that draw is mitigated by the fact that you get the mana to cast it right now. So you don't even usually have to worry about like, well, what if I can't cast all these cards? I don't actually get the full value. You almost always do. You get a land drop and then,
Yeah.
The only time you whiff is when there's 3 lands, or maybe like 2 lands and a rock. It's still not the worst thing ever. A lot of times you're like, oh, and if you're smart and you've played Jessica Will a lot, you just account for that and you go, I'm going to cast it at a time when I have another effect in my hand that can take advantage of the mana if I don't get something good off the 3 cards.
And even then, like, even if you just hit 3 lands, you play the land, you haven't spent a card.
Yeah.
Now you're up mana.
Yep.
And you have 2 lands off the top of your deck.
Yep.
So it's like it's a ritual that doesn't cost a card, which means it's so powerful. It's just 3 mana. So it's like we don't think of it as broken as Dark Ritual because it doesn't happen until, turn 3 or 4. But it does have that kind of game swing energy to it.
Yeah.
Speaking of game swing energy, Mana Geyser, I feel like you spend a card and you spend 5 mana, but you get
25,
20,
30,
18,
a lot.
so much mana that you're like, you don't get the cards out of it, but it is worth a card at that point. And I think Mana Geyser is the kind of card that it doesn't scream, I'm an 8, but it does say, okay, your deck is designed to do explosive things before we're ready for them.
Yeah, because oftentimes if you can cast Mana Geyser on turn 5, you're going to get somewhere around 15 mana. And 15 mana worth of stuff coming out of your hand on turn 5 is very difficult to deal with in a more casual meta. If you're a 6, imagine you do that in a deck and the pot is full of 6s. That's so early in the game for you to be getting so much stuff out. Like, that's going to tilt the scales very wildly. So the decks that are able to deal with that kind of thing are probably higher up on the scale. And therefore, again, I don't believe that Mana Geyser by itself, you put it in a deck and it automatically becomes an 8. But it's not normally the type of thing that, 6s want to be doing.
Right.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. Density, definitely Jessica's Will and Mana Geyser in the same deck.
You're like,
Yeah, that's a thing where like if I did that, I would be like, I can't with a straight face say that this is a 7. This is an 8 now because
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the big goblin in the room, the big pirate in the room.
Oh, it's Dockside Extortionist.
Which is kind of a ritual.
It's a ritual. It's a ritual.
Yeah.
It's a very, very abusable ritual.
And I think we sort of
that
glossed over the fact that, Jeweled Lotus and some of these other ones, yes, you can recur them, Lotus Petal and things like that, and there are synergies. So obviously we know those things could happen, and that happens with Dockside. But on its face, Dockside is a 2 mana thing that comes in and gives you a lot more than 2 mana.
Right. And it doesn't have the ritual thing where it's like, okay, you're going off now.
Yeah.
It says I could go off
it's
later.
Even better.
I could get like some kind of value. I could take advantage of just having all those artifacts enter. I could tap those artifacts for mana instead of sacking them. I could get sacrifice triggers from sacrificing them.
Oh, jeez.
Dockside gives you so much more than a burst in mana.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you can clone it, you can blank it, you can reanimate it, you can like sack it for mana, you can block with it.
It's crazy.
You're knocked
It can wear a sword of peace and famine.
Yeah, yes.
Like it is everything and it does everything, yeah.
I feel like Dockside is it's scarier to me than Mana Crypt. Like if I see a Dockside, I'm like, your deck's an 8.
Yeah.
It goes from 6 to an 8 basically immediately. It's super easy to tutor for in any color.
Yep. I agree. I don't know where it sits on my scale, but of the cards we've talked about so far, I believe Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, Jessica's Will do change the power level of your deck and should be taken into account. I think Jessica's Will probably could be in a 7, but probably not a 6. The other two, you're at least an 8, and Dockside is in that category.
Yeah.
I don't think a Dockside can exist in a deck that is a 7, really. Obviously, people can concoct these weird, like crazy decks again that are built around theming around art, and
guys,
there's no synergy at all, but it's guys with hats. Yeah, exactly. And in that case, yes, Dockside probably doesn't. But for we're talking about the vast majority of decks
I
here.
do think it changes the power level of that deck.
That deck can't be a 1.
It takes it from a 4 to a 5.
Yeah.
It takes it from a 3 to a 4.
Yeah.
Like it does fully move it a step or two from where it is.
For sure.
The moment you sleeve up a Dockside.
For sure.
So obviously that's top of the list. The next category that we're talking about in the fast mana thing is on lands, and these are lands that tap for more mana than 1.
Right.
Basically.
They're ramp lands.
Yeah,
and often with no other real downside.
Right.
Yeah, because bounce lands obviously tap for 2, but they have a pretty big downside. You bounce another land, they come in tapped, so I don't think they really count in this category. These are ones where there often is a downside, but the downside is not real. Yeah, right. So the big one, or the first one that comes to mind is Ancient Tomb, which just straight up comes in and just taps for 2. Now, yes, it deals 2 damage to you, but again, we have double.
Who's counting?
We have double the amount of life, so it's almost like it really was rebalanced to only deal 1 damage, which they never would have designed.
No.
It's already broken in the current design. And this is a very powerful card that I think is close to Jessica's Will for me, where I think it does change the power level of your deck, and I don't think that, for the most part, you're probably a 6 anymore if you have an Ancient Tomb in your deck. How do you feel about it?
I think it has a similar thing as like a Mana Crypt. Like I'm really not putting it in any deck that is operating at a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
Like it's just not. The kind of deck that is willing to pay life for resources is generally just going to live at an 8. And
it's more on the optimal side for sure.
The way that I build is I either sort of build with none of these cards or all of these cards because I like that's a very clear line for me where it's like this deck doesn't play it doesn't play Mana Crypt, it doesn't play Ancient Tombs, it just doesn't. And then there's a very clear deck building line for me that I can like build something that's very powerful and synergistic without any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But if I'm playing Ancient Tomb, which I love to play Ancient Tomb, I'm like, we're doing it. We're putting Mana Crypt in. We're playing we're hitting the gas.
It's like a cheat meal.
Yeah.
For me, it's
exactly.
like I don't want to say I'm never going to eat French fries again for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I just want to eat better in general, so I get a cheat meal once in a while. And I still want Ancient Tomb's a sweet card, and Dockside's a sweet card, and Mana Crypt's a sweet card, and Jessica's Will's a sweet card, and I want to be able to play those cards. I just need to pick my spot, right? I don't eat that for every meal, and this is like, this is going to be a treat. This deck is in the 8 or maybe even 9 category, and I have a few of those. But I know most of my decks want to be 7s so I can play with the most amount of people, and in those decks, I don't allow myself to have an Ancient Tomb. Maybe I'm thinking more and more Jessica's Will doesn't belong down in the 7 either. And wherever anybody wants to personally draw that line, we're just giving our opinions, obviously. I think it's fine, but that is a healthy way to think about it, I think. I really like that, of like, I like these cards. I'm not saying I don't like these cards.
They're
I'm
awesome.
just aware of where I place them so that when I play it, I give the best chance for everybody to have a good experience because we all know, we're all signing up for what we got. Right?
Yeah.
Where I don't accidentally be like, I thought it was a 6, but then I tap my Ancient Tomb to cast my Dockside Extortionist and, sack 27 treasures to Korvold, which I got out on turn 3 because of Jeweled Lotus. Turns out it wasn't a 6. You know what I mean?
It wasn't a 6.
Yeah.
It's this category also has like a Gaia's Cradle, of course. Obviously, there's a bigger financial barrier to having a Gaia's Cradle in your deck, but when a Gaia's Cradle comes down, of like, all right, we're not messing around.
It's not a 7 if you've got a Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah. It's just not.
Yep.
And there's a couple cards in this category. A lot of them, like those are the big ones for me. It's like Ancient Tomb and Gaia's Cradle.
For sure.
And then with an asterisk, Sarah's Sanctum, which makes mana for all of your enchantments. Because it's not that hard to build an Enchantress deck. It's not like that's a great limitation on your deck.
It's like Gaia's
building
Cradle.
Enchantress. It's just great.
Yeah.
So
if it's in a deck, it's going to be Gaia's Cradle, basically.
Yeah, it's going to
You wouldn't
be
put it in a
busted.
deck that only has 5 enchantments.
If it's an enchantment deck, it's probably not a 6.
True. True.
But those are like the big 3. Beyond that, the cusp cards that are sort of warning cards for me is like Gemstone Caverns is a big one, which is a land that you can play on turn 0, basically.
A pregame action, yep.
Yeah, if you're not going first. So it just ramps you for free. It's kind of like a Mox, but it's a land.
Yep.
And that's the kind of card that I'm like, oh, okay, I guess we're playing Gemstone Caverns. And then City of Traders.
Yeah, honestly, Gemstone Caverns, after we've learned that the player going first gets such an advantage, maybe it's not that bad.
Yeah. But still,
if I see it, I know that you are optimized. You're very worried about how fast you're moving and how fast you're going off. And that's, to me, is similar to like Chrome Mox or something where the alarm bells are ringing a little bit. Yeah, I'm worried about it.
I'm just going to keep an eye on you.
Yeah. The next one is interesting, and I would love to get your take on this one, which is Cabal Coffers.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that card? And I think it's impossible to talk about it without pairing it with Urborg.
Yes.
Because a deck that has Cabal and not Urborg, I don't think matters at all. But let's assume...
It's just a mono black deck.
Let's assume it is a deck that has Urborg, wants Urborg, and you put Cabal Coffers in. Is that a card that has an effect similar to Ancient Tomb, or is it not that big of a deal?
So here's my thing on Cabal Coffers and two-color decks.
Yeah.
Is if you're running Cabal Coffers, I know you're running Urborg, and I know you're running Tutors to find them.
Yeah.
I have a because it doesn't do anything if you don't have both in a two-color deck. So now I've already been like, okay, you're running a powerful land, you're running the combo piece with it, and you've got to be having at least, 1 or 2 slots dedicated to just assembling that.
Yeah, I think the normal package is Expedition Map plus Demonic Tutor plus Vampiric.
Yeah. Then I sort of assume you're running those other things, which moves it up for me.
Yeah.
But that's, again, it's an assumption. It's not like, I don't think those 2 cards on their own really move the needle, but I assume you're going to use them, because otherwise Cabal Coffers is a very big downside in a deck where you're going to have like, you have to get to what? You have to get to 4 swamps in play for it to be mana positive if you don't have an Urborg in play.
Yeah, if you have 3, it's equal.
3,
so mana positive is 4. It taps for 2.
And until then, it doesn't tap for
any. And even
mana.
at that, it taps for 2. It's not like...
Yeah, it's not
Temple
it's
of the False God, exactly. Actually, because you'd have to have 5 lands at that point.
Right.
So, yeah, Temple of the False God is definitely not broken.
No, Temple of the False God's a little slower. Yeah, so that's my assumption with Cabal Coffers is like, if you're there, then you're here.
Yeah. Well, it's in black, so often blacks do have a couple of tutors lying around anyway. So, let's assume that they do have 2 to 3 tutors. Just their deck already did because they're black,
right? And
they put Cabal Coffers in, and it didn't before. Do you think it changed the power level of their deck?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it'd be tough to be a 7 or an 8. I mean, tough to be a 7.
It's definitely. I don't think it's a 6. I think it's pretty tough to be a 7 if you have those and the tutors to find them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of agree.
Yeah.
And I have run that package in a lot of decks for like game nights and stuff. And I think game nights is like in the 7.5 range generally.
Yeah.
Low 8s.
Yeah. Is generally how we build. The next one I think is interesting. It's a Smothering Tithe.
Yeah. This is almost like its own category.
Yeah. I have it just listed as Smothering Tithe.
It's definitely fast mana.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But I don't know if it's a mana rock. It's not a dork.
It's not fast mana until like
it's not that fast.
It takes a little bit of time. The thing about Smothering Tithe is it's a mana source, and I think it's definitely going to give you more mana than you cast, especially if you have ways to abuse it, or if your opponents are drawing extra cards, which they should be.
There always are. Somebody is.
Somebody is. Yeah. Somebody's drawing extra cards.
Yeah.
It's a permanent that has to be removed that takes advantage of your opponents taking regular game actions that doesn't cost you anything beyond that, right? And if nobody answers a Smothering Tithe, they win.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to beat a Smothering Tithe that just goes unmolested.
Even just 2 rotations of normal play plus 6 mana is because of the fact that they're treasures. It's, I think when this card originally came out, a lot of people sort of misevaluated it because they sort of compared it to Thran Dynamo or something like that. 4 mana, I'll get 3 back. But treasures, as you mentioned earlier, are not the same. I can store them up for later. I can get effects when they synergize with things. They go towards your artifact count. They are sacrifice triggers. There's all kinds of different reasons they're good. But even just at the base level of like, hey, I cast this. I don't use any of the mana for 2 turns. And now on turn 6, I have 12 mana. And 12 mana is, possible starting to move towards winning the game amount of mana.
Right.
And so, and that's in the most modest possible scenario. Yeah. Like, how many games have you been in of Commander ever that on, when you're at the 4 CMC point of the game, 2 rotations go by and no one draws an extra card.
Yeah, that's wild. No.
Yeah, it just never happens. Usually it's dramatically in the other direction where somebody draws 8 and you're like, sweet.
Oh, you didn't pay for that?
Yeah. I have 11 treasure, not 3.
And now I'm untapping with a huge advantage that you have not dealt with because it's very difficult to. You can't just pay the 2 on Smothering Tithe and expect to keep up with it. That's a huge tax on every time you draw a card. And the interesting thing about treasures that makes them so much more powerful is that they're emergency mana, right?
Yeah.
Where you can hold up for a counterspell, and if you don't need to spend the counterspell.
Yep.
You're like, great, I don't lose the mana.
Yep.
I also don't, like, if you hold up 2 lands, you lose that mana.
Yep.
If you hold up 2 treasures,
yep.
I didn't spend anything, I didn't save anything, and I had the counterspell up. And that's makes you so flexible. And that's the power of Smothering Tithe, right? Where you have to pay the 2 so they don't have a second treasure, so they don't have a counterspell up.
It's so hard to pay the 2. Nobody pays the 2 because me spending 2 mana to stop you from having 1 is a bad trade.
Ugh,
if it was 1 for 1, maybe. Yeah, but 2 for 1 is bad. I don't actually believe it's even right to pay for it most of the time.
I agree. Yeah, I never.
Ristic Study, you're like, listen, everybody got to pay.
Yeah.
And when you don't, you're like, you should pay.
You should pay.
Yeah, that's if you want.
I can't pay. It's like you can pay. Just wait.
Yeah, exactly.
You can.
Yeah,
you can.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I think you're wrong. Not that I've never done it before.
Yeah.
But Smothering Tithe, when people don't pay, I'm like, yeah, I kind of don't think you should.
No.
Like, I get it. What are you supposed to do? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just.
And then if you're trying to draw cards to remove it, you're defeating it more. Ugh, it's brutal.
So let me ask you.
Yeah.
On our scale here we've been referring to, let's just call it the, Mana Crypt scale or whatever.
Sure.
If a Smothering Tithe is in your deck, do you believe it intrinsically changes power level? Can you be a 6 with a Smothering Tithe in your deck?
A 6? No, I don't think so.
Can you be a 7 with a Smothering Tithe in your deck?
Probably, but that means that you don't have a ton of other acceleration in the deck. Like, if this is paired with a Mana Crypt and this comes down in turn 2, oh my god. But
yeah, if there's a Mana Crypt and a Smothering Tithe. But Mana Crypt all by itself, we said, turns you into an 8 no matter what anyway.
Yeah, you're just an 8. Yeah. I think you could probably be a 7 with a Smothering Tithe, but that means you're not running wheels.
I think the one thing I'll say about Smothering Tithe is it's a 4-drop.
Yeah.
So it's unlikely to cause like a turn 4 win or turn 5 win. It's likely to cause a turn 7 or 8 win.
For sure.
And maybe even a turn 5 win if you know what.
Depending on it.
But if your deck can win on turn 5, even with the Smothering Tithe, it's not a 7. Yeah. I agree with you. I'd put it near Jessica's Will, closer than it's. I put Dockside and Mana Crypt up a little bit higher than I'd put Smothering Tithe and Jessica's Will.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, the next one's another one that sort of stands on its own because it's fast mana.
It's mana drain.
As we were going through,
it's a ritual, right?
Yeah. Rachel, this happened with a lot of cards where Rachel and I are going through talking about. We're like, where does this one go? I don't know.
Sort of
definitely we need to talk about it, but where do you put it? Because I do believe the powerful part about it is the mana you get, right?
Yes.
Because counterspell, we're not going to talk about.
Counterspell doesn't change the power level.
Yeah, the fact that it counters a spell is actually not what makes it powerful. It is the mana you get for countering. Let's say this same card existed but didn't counter the spell.
Yeah, you play that.
And it would still be...
blue, make that much mana on your upkeep?
Yeah.
You play that.
And it would almost be as powerful.
Yeah.
It's definitely less, but it would be... The gap is not as huge as the inverse of that, which is a counter spell that doesn't give you the mana, which we know because a million of that card exists, but none of the other one does. Yeah. The fact that, you go ramp, have your 2 things there, they're like, cool, 5-drop, and you're like, yep, counter that. Now my turn comes around and I have 10 mana.
Oh my god.
I've got your 5 and my 5 or 6 or whatever.
There's no limitation on that. You can spend it right away. It's yeah, I mean, I think Mana Crypt I think Mana Drain is Mana Crypt level. I think it's like, if you're running Mana Drain, it's an 8. Like, if I see Mana Drain in a 7, I have big questions.
Yeah, that doesn't seem... It's better than Smothering Tithe and just... Not better, but it's...
It changes it for me more than those two, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think... Yeah, it's hard for me to envision a 7 that has a Mana Drain and is legitimately not closer to an 8. Yeah.
Mana Drain is
part of that the cost consideration though, because it is an expensive card.
It's possible.
Let's imagine a parallel universe where they've reprinted Mana Drain so much that it's $2.12.
Yeah.
Is it still do that?
I think so. It's so much mana.
Yeah, it is.
Like the amount of times I've seen people be like, sorry, I have to counter this. I just need the mana.
Right?
Like,
that's why they do it.
That's why they do it.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a huge ritual that doesn't cost you a card because it's naturally a 1-for-1. So you trade your 1 for their 1.
Yep.
And then you're up mana.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh, my 7-drop commander's coming out right now, Boop. By the way. And I still hold up mana for the next counterspell when you try and kill it. Yeah.
Okay. Up next, we are going to talk about some more very powerful spells in our format, specifically the ones that cost no mana.
Oh, yeah.
The free guys. We're going to get to those after a few words from our sponsors.
Josh, when we first started the Command Zone podcast, did you ever think it was going to turn into a full-blown business?
Absolutely not. I mean, honestly, I didn't think we were going to last a year.
But now we moved into a brand new space with a full staff making more content than ever.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. But luckily, we found a lot of great tools to help us along the way, like Shopify.
Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business, whether you're at the apartment stage or in the full office suite.
For a long time, we didn't have a merch store because, well, the logistics can get pretty daunting. But Shopify's all-in-one e-commerce platform helped us expand what we could offer and get our stuff in the hands of our fans.
Tons of businesses use Shopify, like Brooklinen, Rothy's, Allbirds, and you can see why. They've got the internet's best converting checkout, powerful tools like Shopify Magic, and an award-winning support system that's there for you no matter what.
It just makes the selling side of your business that much easier. So you can focus on the things you really care about, like playing Magic, or talking about playing Magic, or playing Magic.
You know what, Josh? We do have cool jobs.
Yeah, we do.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/TCZ, all lowercase.
Go to shopify.com/TCZ now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Again, shopify.com/TCZ.
Where's Jimmy? He's usually so punctual.
Yeah.
Hey! Sorry about that. I was just getting my deck together, or most of it.
But that's just a really big stack of envelopes.
I prefer to think of it as pre-sleeved.
Well, where's your commander?
Let me check. Tracking says he's in shipping label created.
Jimmy, you really gotta use Card Kingdom. They send all of your cards in one convenient package. No dealing with tons of envelopes or wrangling all those tracking numbers.
And Card Kingdom's shipping is super fast, so you can be sure you'll have that new deck ready before your next game night.
And if anything ever goes wrong with an order, their customer service always goes above and beyond to fix it.
All right, that settles it. I'm using Card Kingdom from now on. But for now, is everyone ready to play?
I mean, I guess. Do you even have a keepable hand?
Hang on, I gotta shuffle.
Get your cards in one safe, easy package with Card Kingdom. When you go to cardkingdom.com/command, you can support the show while shopping from Card Kingdom's huge selection of singles, sealed product, and more. Again, that's cardkingdom.com/command.
All right, my new deck list is complete. Now, let's see which cards I don't already own and buy them.
Wait, how'd you do that without going through a million boxes?
Oh, I just use ARCHIDEKT. They make it super easy to upload and manage your collection. Then, when you're done brewing a deck, you can sort it by collection status to see what you already have.
So this group is just cards you don't own.
Yep, I just click buy this stack, and it takes me right to Card Kingdom.
Whoa.
ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest commander decks. Just go to archidekt.com/commandzone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/commandzone. All right, welcome back. We are talking about cards that change the power level of your deck.
The next category we're talking about is free spells that have an alternate casting cost that isn't mana. And of course, the first one we're going to talk about is just the free counter spell suite. That means Force of Will, Fierce Guardianship, and for me, Force of Negation are the big 3 free counter spells that
Absolutely.
I'm like, if you're running these, I have a hard time believing you're a 7.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any rebuttal.
If I'm sitting at a 7 table and my commander gets free counterspelled, I'm like, oh, okay.
What happened?
I wasn't ready. Like, I would have played differently if I knew we were playing there.
Yeah, I believe you could have like one Fierce Guardianship and maybe be at 7.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I think
if you
that's
have
fair.
2 of these, you're not.
No.
Yeah. And you have to have one Fierce Guardianship, and like if you have a Fierce Guardianship and a Jessica's Will, you're already above 7 in my book.
Yeah,
like,
I think so.
It's like I have this because I opened it or whatever, but the rest of my deck is not, doesn't have any of the crazy cards we've talked about. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Like-
if you have 3 of these,
Yeah.
Yeah, you're at least an 8, and you're pushing 9 just with the 3 of them. Like
I have, like, my Feldergrift deck is a very interesting... My Feldergrift deck has a terrible plan, right? It's trying to give you infinite hippos and take advantage of that. But that deck runs Fierce Guardianship, it runs Force of Will, it runs Smothering Tithe, and it is not a 7.
Right.
And it has a dumb...
Oh, I've played against that
it's
deck.
not.
It's an 8, yeah.
It's an 8.
It's a very good deck.
It is a dumb plan.
It's a cool deck.
And it's sweet, and I love it. But it is, like, I would never tell you it is a casual... Like, it is playing powerful cards.
Yeah, I think you're just at the top of casual. I still believe it's casual. It's not EDH, right?
It's certainly not.
Yeah, but I love that about our format, and I think this is a good thing to bring up here. I believe that like there are some strategies that the only way to really make them viable, and by viable I mean like I get to sometimes do the thing I want to do, is to add the powerful cards. Yeah, like I have a Tim deck, and my Tim deck I believe is close to an 8. It's probably a little. I haven't updated in a little while, so it's probably a little below it now. But it has powerful cards just to allow it to do the stupid thing it wants to do, because the thing it wants to do is pretty bad. Yeah. But if you back it up with Force of Will, Fierce Guardianship, a Jessica's Will, and something else, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, cool. My plan's still dumb, but these powerful cards allow me to still try that plan. And I think that's great. I think that's a good thing.
That's one of my favorite decks in the world.
Yeah, just be open-eyed about it. And I like that you're like, listen, but that deck's an 8. And I'm not running around saying it's a 6 because of what it's trying to do. How it's trying to do it makes it, up in the upper echelons. And that's often a smart way to build if you know your playgroup and the people you're playing with, just to say like, because I won't have any fun if I straight up build it in a manner that doesn't have enough powerful cards to let me get to the point where I can try the stupid thing.
We play in the kind of playgroup where it's like you need these powerful cards to sort of survive and make these dumb, crazy things possible. So it's this is an interesting category because I do think that these cards fundamentally, if you're in your deck, change it regardless of what your win con is.
And this is a little like Mana Dorks, where multiple of them, I think you get away with one and still not be quite 8, but multiple of them, and you kind of immediately are.
Right.
Pact of Negation is an interesting one.
I was going to say, because we haven't mentioned it.
Where do you put that on? Because it is intrinsically different from the other 3 in that the downside of it is way larger.
Yeah, you have to pay 5 on your upkeep to not lose the game immediately.
Yeah.
Pact of Negation for me doesn't change. Like it's the worst of those, but if you're playing Pact of Negation, I assume you're playing others because it's the it's the lowest on the list.
Yeah.
So I assume it also is this only. No, it's counter target spell.
Yep.
I assume if you're running that, you're minimally running Fierce Guardianship, and I'm going to be more aware of free counter spells coming out of your deck than I would normally. But Pact of Negation is usually a defensive spell. It's usually to protect your big turn. It's like you don't plan on paying the 5. You're just trying to like...
I'm not going to pay the 5 because I'm going to win.
I'm going to win now. Which indicates a more powerful deck, but I don't necessarily think of it as like this huge scary boogeyman.
I've seen a lot of Pact of Negations cast to like save from a board wipe or whatever. And they end up paying the 5, and the paying the 5 is like so bad that the board wipe almost would have been better for them. Yeah. To the point where, like, I don't believe Pact actually does change your deck too much. It obviously is a powerful effect, but it's so narrow and situational that, unless you have the other stuff, I don't believe Pact sort of falls into the category of changing your power level. What do you think about... Because this is the free spells category.
Yeah, and I put in a bunch of 1-drops in this cusp category for this one.
Which feels fair to talk about, stuff like Flusterstorm.
Yeah, so these are hyper-efficient spells that are narrow interaction. So this category is like, for me, it's like Flusterstorm, a Red Elemental Blast, Pyroblast, even something like Silence. All of these are 1-mana instants that interact with your opponents on a very specific axis. And while these, I don't think, change the power level of your deck, they say a lot to me about what kind of things you're used to or designed to interact with. And I think if you're running stuff that specifically counters blue spells like Veil of Summer or Pyroblast, or stuff that specifically stops storm turns like Silence, you are prepared to play in a very powerful, very explosive meta, which says to me that your deck is designed to play in a powerful, explosive
and it's therefore
meta.
Must be powerful.
Yeah. If you can interact with that, then you are also probably in that category.
Yeah.
So they're warning bells for sure.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard for me to imagine a Veil of Summer in a 6.
Yeah.
Because a 6 just isn't worried about what
doesn't
Veil
protect
Summer
against
is
swords
giving
to plowshares.
you.
It's garbage.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way to look at it, I think. In that those cards don't intrinsically actually change the power level of your deck, but the fact that you've decided to put them in and keep them in your deck
means they do something.
Means you've been playing against powerful stuff, and if your deck can hang with powerful stuff, it's probably powerful.
Yeah. The more general category of free spells, we're going to talk about just sort of omniscience-ish cards. So cards that allow you to play other cards for free.
Okay. Well, we should start with Omniscience.
Yes.
Because
let's start with Omniscience.
The category.
Omniscience is interesting to me because if you have Omniscience in your deck, I do not think you're just casting Omniscience.
Yeah, you're probably cheating it out.
You're probably
right?
tutoring it to the battlefield somehow.
Yeah. Almost nobody is just like, I'm putting this in my deck so that I can pay 10 mana someday and do that. Yeah.
There probably are decks that do that, but that's not my experience with Omniscience. So I assume if you're playing Omniscience, you're playing powerful, like tutor to the battlefield type stuff.
Yep.
So
where does it fall? Do you think it changes the...
But if you just throw an Omniscience into your deck, I don't think that makes your deck more powerful.
Right.
It just now you just have a 10 mana spell that you have to figure out how to cast.
But if you're an OG Joda deck, the difference between a version of that deck that has an Omniscience and doesn't is pretty big.
Is a big difference,
yeah. So that could push your power level up.
Right.
Yeah. So it kind of matters what's around it.
It's a combo card, I think, in most times that I see it.
There's a card called Dream Halls that is pretty rare to see these days because it's an old card and I believe it's on the reserve list.
I think so. It's very expensive.
Yeah, but it is a very powerful card that allows you to discard a card of a color to cast another card of that color for free.
Turns everything into in your hand into force of that card.
Force of whatever the card is you're casting. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this one is extremely powerful because it basically allows you to cast half the cards in your hand for free. And ends up playing a lot like Omniscience for 5 mana rather than 10. Now, there's the caveat. It does give your opponents the ability to do the same thing, but generally you win the turn you play Dream Halls.
Yeah, or you put it in decks that draw a huge amount of cards.
Yeah, and you're saying, if I get Dream Halls, I'm just waiting until I have 20, 30, 40 cards in hand, and then I cast it. And you're like, whatever, you can cast 1 card or 2 cards if you got an instance, but I can cast 20. And that'll just be the end of the game.
Yeah.
So Dream Halls is a card that I would earmark as something that does change the power level of your deck if you put it in. Because if you have, if you have the wherewithal to put it in your deck, it's kind of going to be like, it's like how I say, if Skull Clamp's in your deck, it's probably the best card in your deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dream Halls is kind of like that.
Probably the best card in your deck.
If it's in your deck, it probably is very powerful at changing the power level.
Another one I wanted to talk about in this category isn't exactly free, but it is sort of this repeatable caster free thing, is Isochron Scepter.
Yep.
Isochron Scepter, of course, is a traditional combo piece. If you're playing it, it's most likely that you're playing it with Dramatic Reversal.
Yep.
But even if you're not playing it with Dramatic Reversal, which usually gives you infinite mana, I think if you're playing it, it means you're running a very high density of very cheap instants, which makes, to me, that sounds like your deck is it's highly interactive, it's very efficient, and it's designed to use this to put a counterspell on it or to put a fog on it or some very difficult to interact with thing that you get to use over and over again.
Yeah. I don't know that I think Isochron's particularly different than a lot of powerful cards if you don't have Dramatic Reversal in your deck, though. Let's just say it's counterspells and brainstorms. If you get a counterspell on it, that's annoying for sure, but that's not... The table could overcome it.
Yeah, for sure.
And probably will, because that's annoying. It's super annoying.
Hard,
a
lot.
Yeah, and I've seen brainstorms on Isochron Scepters before, which is cool and something I would like to do.
DIY Sensei's Divining
Yeah,
Cup.
I would like to do that personally myself because it seems fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know that I think if you just put an Isochron in, it changes much, but yeah.
It's a synergy piece. It really depends on what you're putting under it and what you're doing with it.
But I think if you take your average blue deck that just has, let's say, 15, cards that are 2 mana or less that are instants, Isochron's going to be good, but I think it's probably not insane. Yeah.
There's one more card in this category I wanted to talk about, and I think this is a cusp card. It's a card I played with. It's Fires of Invention. This lets you cast 2 spells for free on your turn. It's as long as their mana value is less than the number of lands that you have. And then you can only cast spells during your turn is the limitation. So I used to run this in Kenrith.
Because you can use your mana in other ways.
I'm using my mana, so I'll cast spells for free, and then I can dump all that mana into activated abilities. And every time a Fires of Invention comes down, I'm kind of like, whoa, all right, what are we doing?
Yeah.
So I think, but it does require a huge build around and is like a very specific card. So that's one of the ones that sets off alarm bells, but doesn't necessarily, I think, like jump your deck in its power level. I was already playing Kenrith. It was pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. Every time I've seen Fires of Invention, which admittedly is not that many times, I've just thought, oh, that's a good include. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's often been very good, but it hasn't felt like you lied about the power level of your deck.
Yeah.
It felt... Every time I've seen it, it's felt like, yep, that's pretty sweet. Yeah.
It's a cool one.
Yeah, but I think you could still be a 6 with Fires of Invention. It depends on what's going around.
Yeah, that's true. What you're using your mana for real.
Yeah. Okay, the next category is life for mana. Also kind of life for cards.
Yeah, so, well, this first section is life for mana, and then we'll talk about life for cards in a second. But I have this card in both categories.
Yeah.
Both the Citadel. It lets you spend life to cast a card off of the top of your library. It's just, if you get it into play, it launches you into the stratosphere, especially if you get it down early.
This is a card that I think for myself fits in the category of Jessica's Will, where you can easily put it in every deck that has black, and I started not doing that purposefully to keep my decks below a certain power threshold, which is, I believe, the 7 to 8 line.
Yeah. I think it can be a 7 with the Bolas' Citadel, but it's like a Smothering Tithe situation where it's like, I don't put it in every deck because I know it could go in every deck.
Yeah. And it could go in every deck because it is so good. Like, you cast it, your chances to win the game go up a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely seen Bolas' Citadel's resolve where that person didn't win, but it's rare.
It usually means that the deck isn't designed to take advantage of Bolas' Citadel, but...
Or they're kind of casting it at a point where it's a little bit desperate.
Yeah,
they're behind and they know, I just got to try and do something now and see what's up there, but usually you set it up at a point and cast it where you're going to win, yeah. The next one you have listed is Kirik, son of Yawgmoth, and this lets you turn all your black pips into Phyrexian mana, so you can pay 2 life for all the black pips on all your stuff. Yeah, this is turning life into mana, which there's this whole section. And it's, Channel is the banner card for this, which is banned in the format for a reason, just because even in 20 life, it's broken. But in a 40 life format, all of a sudden, this really kind of almost could be talked about in the fast mana category we had earlier.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
This is sort of I wanted to talk about this because there's some interesting cards. Like I want to talk about Noxious Revival and Gitaxian Probe, because these are cusp cards for me, where they're not going to change the power level of your deck, but if I see them, they indicate a more powerful deck to me, because it means that your deck is as efficient as it possibly can be.
Yeah,
like you're including free spells intentionally because you need to be able to play on that access.
I mean, I love a good Git Probe. I think Git Probe is probably a little less powerful than Noxious Revival, which is Noxious Revival is ridiculously good.
Yeah.
And another card that you could just play in every deck with green, and it probably makes most of the decks better. But you're right. They're so efficient, and the fact that you're so worried about efficiency means that you're probably playing in a meta that is very powerful and sort of is indicative. The card that belongs in this category that I just thought of is Treasonous Ogre. Which is another card that I started pulling from decks because I felt it was just pushing the power level too much, which is let you pay life for red mana.
3 life for red, yeah.
Yeah, and that sounds crazy, but you often would play it and just be like, pay 30, get 10 mana, try and win.
Yeah.
Because how many games, you think about and you're just like, if I just had 2 more mana, I had a chance to win on this turn. You're doing all the sequencing and you're like, crap, I could cast this and this, but I'm just 2 mana short.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. The next category is draw engines. So these are very powerful draw engines in the format.
How dare you?
And
how dare you?
List. This first category is called Do You Pay? And this, of course, is Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, and Esper Sentinel are all extremely powerful draw engines that take advantage of your opponents doing stuff.
Yep.
I think Rhystic Study is the kind of card that I don't know if it's Smothering Tide level for me. It's Bolas' Citadel, Jessica's Will category.
I agree.
Where I don't think it's not mana. It's not automatically an 8.
Yeah.
It's not mana drain.
But you don't have a lot more going on to this. Gets you most of the way to 8.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's the kind of card that like if I see it, I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Well, maybe I need to keep a closer eye on you. Certainly pay the one, but keep a closer eye on you. Mystic Remora is interesting. That's like Mystic Remora I have a tough time placing.
Well, it's because it naturally becomes less powerful in more casual pods, and just by the nature of how the card is designed.
Yeah.
So it is an interesting sort of almost self-policing one, where I do think it's probably more powerful than Risk Study, and when I see it, it tends to be in more powerful decks. But I believe, I've seen it in casual decks where people just happen to have it or have come across it, and because lower powered decks tend to be less efficient, not casting a lot of spells in turn, casting more single spells, they can tend to be more creature focused. Mystic Remora often sort of does less in those pods, and therefore is kind of an interesting card that is almost like, I don't believe putting a Mystic Remora in your 6 changes it much.
Yeah.
Because if you're playing against 8s, it'll help you more, in which case you need it. And if you're playing against 6s and 5s,
it's not that good.
You'll draw a couple cards off of it, but the cumulative upkeep, there's more turns. Each turn is less impactful. So it's going to just sort of do less for you. Probably still be an okay card to include, but not game breaking.
Yeah.
So it sits in a really good spot. It's almost like I wish they could design more cards that fluctuate with the power level in this way. It's probably hard to do. Sorry, Gavin, but if you can do it, this is a pretty cool place to sit. Where in casual it does something, but it's not broken, but as you go up the power scale, it gets better and better, and is still playable up. 10s play Mystic Remora.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
So,
but if I see a Mystic Remora, I don't assume you're a 10.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. It's a Esper Sentinel sort of walks and talks like a Mystic Remora, but isn't quite a Mystic Remora.
Yeah, it's limited to one.
Yeah,
it's a big deal.
It's limited to its power. You could buff it.
No, I meant one
card per turn.
Yeah, you can't get multiple cards, which is a big deal off Mystic Remora, because in high power levels, they're going to play a lot of Git Probes, Noxious Revivals, a lot of low CMC stuff, and so you're going to draw 3 or 4 cards off one person sometimes, whereas Esper Sentinel's capped at 1, but you don't have a cumulative upkeep.
That's true. You can keep it forever. I will say Esper Sentinel is extremely easy to pay the 1 for. If it's just a 1/1 and you're not paying the 1 for Esper Sentinel, watch it.
Watch it.
You should be paying.
Watch yourself.
You can do it.
Check yourself.
You can do it.
I mean, for the most part, I think a lot of the reason Risk Study and Esper Sentinel are good is opponents' play error.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and that's probably another argument sort of, I'm going to say, against them at lower casual tables, because those players are, often sort of newer, they're not as veteran, and they haven't learned yet to pay for it. So it's taking advantage of sort of that part of it, which might be okay. Like, part of what we're trying to do is be smarter.
They'll learn eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people don't, though, because
that's true.
It's play error that's hard to identify. At the end of the game, when they cast, Craterhoof and kill you, it feels like Craterhoof killed you, when a lot of times Risk Study killed you. Yeah. And that's just it's a hard thing to go back, replay the game in your mind, and identify that was the reason you lost. If I had just paid the 1 and my opponents had done the same thing, 3 or 4 more times, they probably don't have as many creatures. They don't hit their land drops. Craterhoof comes out 2 or 3 turns later. Maybe they never even draw it, and it's a totally different game. So, Where do you think Esper Sentinel sits? I'm curious on. Is it more like? Is it even on the list with Jessica's Will and Bolas' Citadel, or is it off that list?
I think it is, but I definitely think you can be a 7 and have an Esper Sentinel. Yeah. Like, I don't think I'm going to see it in a 6, probably because of price.
Yeah, but it probably could.
But it probably could
again,
operate
it's
in
non-creature, so I don't think it would be absolutely broken in a 6 environment.
Yeah.
But if you also had Smothering Tithe or something, then it's all of a sudden, that's a different proposition.
I think it's under Jessica's Will for me, but it's not far.
If there's a third tier, so we got Mana Crypt, Dockside in that top tier.
Yeah.
And we've got Jessica's Will, Smothering Tithe, Bolas of Citadel in that second tier. I think Esper Sentinel is in the third tier below that. Where do you think?
Esper Sentinel is something, is there. Like, I would put it somewhere even like a Lotus Petal maybe, where it's like, I expect there's something that you're taking advantage of it. Like, there's some synergy built around it or something like that. You can pump it, or it's a human, or there's a reason it's there.
Then it's just cool.
Then it's cool. I love synergy.
It's also in white, which I think we didn't talk about how color matters, but I think it does for some things.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
For card draw, it's like, it's white's best card draw engine, I think.
I think if you're in a Boros deck or a mono white deck and you play an Esper Sentinel and you say you're 6, I don't bat an eye.
Yeah.
Because
you don't have a ton of options.
Yeah, exactly. You've got one. You need card draw.
Yeah.
And this is a good one, and it doesn't change the power level of your deck. And it's different if you're like in a 5-color deck. You know, you're in a Kenrith deck and you say you're a 6 and you go turn 1 Esper Sentinel.
Yeah.
That's totally different than a mono white deck doing that, right? Like, yeah.
This next category is life for cards, and the first one I think is automatically an 8. It's automatically a 9.
Yeah, I actually think it's automatically.
Is this above?
9.
Yeah, it's ad nauseum. This is 3 black. For those who haven't had the pleasure, ad nause is 3 black for an instant. Reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. You may repeat this process any number of times.
Have you ever seen this card played in what you would consider to be a casual deck?
I have a friend who built specifically an ad nause casual deck.
It's not a CEDH deck.
It is not. It is a mono black Sidisi deck that came in, exploited itself, tutored for Adnaz, drew the whole deck, and then usually he either drew Aetherflux and won, or didn't draw Aetherflux and died.
How do you not draw it? You draw everything, don't you? Oh, you die before you get to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess it's an 8. But it's
close,
just
though.
a bad 9 is what it felt like.
It's a bad 9.
It just felt like it was a 9 that wasn't.
That's what all 8s are.
It just felt like it wasn't quite there. Like Adnaz for me, if you're playing it in casual at all, you are not. It doesn't belong there.
It makes no sense. You're gonna draw 3 cards and take a bunch of damage. Like, what are you gonna do?
It doesn't. Yeah. I think Adnaz just doesn't really have a place in casual, which is interesting. Like Dockside doesn't have a great place in casual, but you see it. Adnaz, I feel like
you could be an 8 and be a Dockside.
Yeah.
And you probably technically could be an 8 and be an Adnaz.
Yeah.
But for Adnaz to be correct to run in your deck, your CMC has to be so low and you have to be so combo driven to make it worth it that it's almost by default a 9.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. It's not like I think Adnaz. It is probably one of the higher
it's
possible
sort of,
to be banned or on the possible,
For
ban
sure.
list cards on the list. I'm not saying I would put it above Dockside or anything like that, but oddly enough, I do believe it pushes the power level of your deck, or it indicates a power level that's even more than Dockside and Mana Crypt.
Yeah. It does sort of do a Mr. Gamora thing where it's really bad in casual and it's really good in CDH.
Yeah.
But
well, Mr. Gamora I think is fine in casual.
Yeah, it's fine in casual.
Adnaz is bad in casual.
Bad.
Yeah.
The next
somebody can tell you, like, this card's amazing. It's in every CH deck, and you, like, put it in your deck, and it kills you.
You just die. Pay 5 mana, you draw 2 cards, and you take 11 damage.
Well,
and
who
you're
said
like,
this was good?
This is terrible. I could play Sign in Blood.
Yeah.
We lose 2 for 2 mana. Speaking of losing life, a Necropotence, I think, is sort of mana drain, Mana Crypt level for me. Like, if you're running Necropotence, for me, I think it makes your deck an 8.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And this is another card that's on my list with Jessica's Will and Mana Crypt and Dockside, where I purposely do not play it in what I want to be 7s and below. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I run it in Lord of Tressorhorn, which is funny because I spend so much cards to get this one stupid thing into play that I was like, I need really powerful draw engines. But it's sort of the Feldergriff thing where it's like that deck has Heuristic Study and it has these things that make it powerful, even though the plan is hit him with a big thing.
I think you like that. That's stupid plan.
I do.
Yeah. And then how can I enable my stupid plan so that it is in some way viable? Yeah. Which I think is fair. Like I said, I think that's one of the cool things about the format.
It's fun. Bolas' Citadel, of course, is here. It lets you cast spells off the top of your library by paying life. So it's sort of both life for cards and mana.
I think if it cost less than 6 CMC, it would be in that top
I agree.
Mana Crypt tier, although we just created an S tier, which is Adnaz.
Which is Adnaz.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's 6 CMC, so it's with Jessica's Will and Smothering Tithe in that B tier.
Cuspier is Sylvan Library. I think you can't have a 6 with a Sylvan Library in it.
Interesting. I think... Okay, no. Tell me your.
But that might be price.
Tell me your reasoning.
Based. It's so much card selection and it's so much card acceleration so early that it just feels like it's an insurmountable thing early. But I do think, like, in a lower powered thing, I don't know. Maybe having all of those cards that early isn't as good. But for me, like, Sylvan Library is just. It's sort of like Sensei's Divining Top, where if you're playing it, I expect you know how to use it, and I expect you're really looking for something.
Yeah, the you know how to use it part is really interesting, and something that just occurred to me is that no place in our calculation are we able to sort of factor in player skill. But this is a card that is much more powerful in better players' hands than in worse player hands.
Yeah.
So if Brian Kibler tells me his deck is a 6 and then he plays a Sylvan Library, he's going to utilize that card to a degree that maybe his deck couldn't be a 6 because he's so good at Magic.
Right.
But whereas my cousin who's still learning how to play or has only played for a little bit of time and this is their first upgraded precon and they put a Sylvan Librarian into it and they said this is a 6.
It might make your deck worse.
Yeah. They probably, my cousin won't pay the life every time, won't know, won't have learned yet, like, crack a fetch and do the thing and even when you don't want the card, pay because you want the card under it and all this kind of stuff. And so it's probably is a 6 in that deck. So it's like, it's I don't know. I don't really know how to categorize it.
Yeah, it's really tough to use correctly, but I think the power level for the efficiency just puts it in that category where it's like, I would assume it's a 7. Or at least has the cards of a 7.
Interesting. I don't think I'm quite there with it, but I see what you're saying. Okay, the next one though.
Yeah.
Talking
Crypt.
about life for cards.
Crypt. It's the One Ring.
Wow.
If the One Ring is in your deck, I think it automatically makes it an 8.
Yeah, I do agree. It's so good.
I would never put it in a 6 or a 7, just because it's so free. It's so powerful. It's like Teferi's protection plus card draw.
It's crazy. Yeah, it feels right. I think it's 8s and above. It's definitely in the category with. Is it? I'm debating in my mind right now. Is it closer to Jessica's Will or is it closer to Dockside? I think for me it's closer to Jessica's Will.
Yeah.
But I still talked, as we talked it through, I still was like, I don't put Jessica's Wills in 7s anymore either. So, it's one of those cards, I think it's similar to Jessica's Will in that, for us specifically, it wasn't clear just how good it was. And then you play it a few times and you see other people play it a few times and you're like,
wow,
holy cow. Yeah. That thing's, every time is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's versatile in that it protects you and stuff. It's so good.
Okay.
Okay. This next category is the name of one of our shows.
It's Extra Turns.
You know why we named it that? It's not because of the spells that give you extra turns, because we thought we already do game nights.
Yeah, it's
this extra.
There are additional turns.
More turns. More gameplay turns. I don't know. It made sense at the time. And we were like, we could call it XT.
It's better than ET.
Yeah, that's
Phone home.
Yeah.
Y'all are too young.
Elliot. Okay.
Extra turns, I feel like, are like mana dorks, where if you have 1, maybe 2, fine.
Yeah.
It doesn't really move the needle.
Maybe 2 does, but 1.
Maybe 2 does.
Is okay.
1 is like, eh.
Yeah.
But if you have any more than that, I feel like Extra Turns really shifts your deck to be at least a 7 strategy, probably an 8.
Yeah. I think if you got 3 extra turn spells, you're right at the cusp of 8. And let's say you have 1, Snapcap Caster Mage or something, and one of those extra turns doesn't shuffle.
Yeah, you've got an Archaeomancer that you can. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're there. Archaeomancer, it's even worse.
Yeah. Now you can actually take infinite turns. If your deck can take infinite turns, it's an 8. Because that's I feel like that's a win con that most 7s are not prepared to fight against.
Because oftentimes your only way to fight against it is counter spells.
Yeah. An interesting part of this category. So that's we're talking about Expropriates and Nexus of Fates are the extra turns. But I do think that Seedborn Muse also goes in this category.
Is also an extra turns card.
It's an extra turns card.
As a Seedborn Muse lover, I concur. I also said Unwinding Clock I think is very similar. Yeah. Whereas it's very difficult for me to envision. No 6s can have a Seedborn Muse or Unwinding Clock. Mm-hmm. And you're probably pushing 8. You could probably get away with being a 7 if your plan is really dumb and you don't have, any of the other powerful cards we've talked about. But in general, those cards let you untop on other players' turns. And assuming that's a thing you want to do because you can use that mana on other players' turns, like you got Kenrith or you just have a lot of instants or whatever. Yeah, you're taking 4 turns for everybody else's 1.
Yeah.
Which I love to do, don't get me wrong.
Super fun.
But it is...
When you have a Seedborn, you're like, I get to play so much Magic.
Yep.
The thing is, you're taking up a lot of the chess clock, which is not necessarily expected at a lot of tables.
Not just that, just you are able to spend 7 mana or 28 mana to everybody's 7, and you're just gonna win. Like yeah.
If you can use it, that will win you the game.
Yeah, it's just too powerful. This is tax on an axis, these extra turn things, and going back to like Nexus of Fate and whatnot, that a lot of decks are not prepared to deal with also.
Right. Yeah. At least Seedborn Muse you can remove.
Yeah.
Basically, anytime you have a thing, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, I guess, but anytime you have a thing that you cannot interact with without a counterspell, I think it bumps the level of your deck. Where if you are expecting your opponents to have a counterspell to be able to interact with you, it means that you're certainly not a 6.
Okay. Are we in the next category here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a lonely card.
This is a one-off card we couldn't figure out where to put. It is Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah. And I sort of want to talk about it with the next card, but I can't exactly explain to you why.
Interesting.
I don't put Cyclonic Rift. I don't think Cyclonic Rift goes in 6s.
It's like Jessica's Will to me.
It's Jessica's Will. It's just not a card that I put in a deck lightly. Because it does have that powerful shift in balance that's in one card.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really require you to have a setup. It doesn't really require anything of you to provide that shift. Obviously, if you have like a ton of stuff on board and you cast something and you like an overrun, that's a shift in power, but it's something that took a lot of work to do. If a single card can throw the balance of the game out of whack, then it feels like it's going to be at least a 7 or an 8. So
yeah, I think the fact that it has a 2-mana mode is sort of what puts it. Because I think like if it just had the 7-mana version and that's all it could do, it'd still be very good. And that's what you do 85% of the time. But the fact that it does save you sometimes when someone's like, cool, suit up my commander, give it unblockable that you didn't see coming and attack you for lethal, you're like, it saved me. And anybody who's played Commander for very long has done that on multiple occasions. And I think if it didn't have that mode, it would be a different proposition. But because it's like, keep me safe, and then when I don't have to use it, win with it.
Yeah.
That's not a lot of cards fit that thing, but it is kind of a unique. We're not going to talk about another board wipe, right? So,
no, I don't. The only other one that even came close, and I decided that it probably didn't make the list, was Farewell.
Yeah.
But Cyclonic Rift doesn't do what Farewell does.
Farewell doesn't do what Cyclonic Rift does.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Is like one just zeros the board. Yeah. Cyclonic Rift shifts the board. It puts weight on the scale.
Yep.
Yeah. So Cyclonic Rift is definitely the kind of card that if you cast it, you are likely to win that game all on its own. And I think this next card is kind of the same.
Interesting.
It's Teferi's Protection.
Yeah.
Because Teferi's Protection is the kind of card that I feel like it went in every white deck, and you were like, yeah, of course. Yeah, Teferi's Protection is Soul Ring in white deck.
There's no argument you can make from a power levels point that Teferi's Protection doesn't belong in a deck that has white.
If it's in white, it's going in the deck.
Yeah.
And I think more and more to me, this is Jessica's Will, where it's like, it's because it's not just board protection. It's a fog. It's an extra turn spell at instant speed for 3 mana that can interrupt or even counter an opponent's turn. Teferi's Protection is so flexible and so powerful that it just guarantees you a second shot at the game, right?
More or less.
Like if it's an instant speed extra turn spell that can win you the game because you can like, all right, I'll fog your attack and now I untap with my board and I can attack back and you didn't expect that. Or it can just be like, all right, there's a board wipe, I'll save my whole stuff. Now it's a one-sided board wipe. And I do think it's that level of powerful that maybe we should be taking a second look at where Teferi's Protection goes. Because again, it's white. So we were like, let white use whatever tools it has.
Yeah.
But these days, white has gotten a lot of tools. It has a lot of great board protection pieces that Teferi's Protection may just be too pushed for a 6s.
That's interesting. I sort of thought about think about Teferi's Protection like it doesn't. You need to have stuff to protect. It doesn't like stop anybody from doing anything exactly. It obviously if they're attacking you or whatever, but it doesn't like affect their boards in any way. So if you don't have stuff to protect, then it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess Cyclonic Rift's kind of like that. If you Cyclonic Rift and you don't have a lot, it won't win you the game, but it will often even out the game.
Extra turns are kind of the same way, where if you take an extra turn, it could just be an explore if you don't have the stuff to take advantage of.
True. Yeah, and Teferi's Protection doesn't like give your creatures haste in the way that extra turn spells do.
Yeah.
It's not, and I guess it is
kind
of similar.
Like if you cast them and cast Teferi's Protection, you're going to untap with them.
That's true. Yeah, it's interesting. It doesn't, but your opponents get to act in between.
Yes.
So, which is kind of a big deal. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't have any good arguments against you. The more I think about it, it is Jessica's Will powerful. I think in that second tier, or I guess now third because of Ad Nauseam.
Yeah.
So in my brain, I was thinking S tier was Mana Crypt and Dockside, but that's Ad Nauseam, and now A tier is Mana Crypt, Dockside, and now B tier is Jessica's Will, Teferi's Protection, Smothering card. Yeah, exactly. A lot of these cards, which means I think you can have 1 or 2 in your 7, but once you're above that, you're an 8.
Yeah. I think you could probably have 1 or 2 in your 6.
Oh, interesting.
And like if you have just a Teferi's Protection in your 6 deck, I think that's probably fine. But if you have Teferi's Protection and a Smothering Tithe,
you're probably already a 7.
You're a 7.
Yeah. Just Teferi's Protection and a Jessica's Will.
Yeah.
You're a 7.
That feels like a 7 to me.
Interesting. Okay. I could buy that.
Yeah.
Teferi's Protection is undoubtedly amazing and very good.
It's extremely, extremely powerful. And it's possible that it doesn't do this, but for me, I feel like I underrated Teferi's Protection, like the impact that it has on a game. I knew it was powerful, but I think it's the kind of card that like maybe if you pull it out, you're like, The difference is with extra turn spells is this does exile itself. You can't like loop Teferi's Protections.
Yeah, which a lot of extra turn spells do, but not the old ones.
Yeah.
Let me throw you a curveball here.
Hit me.
Something popped in my head while we were talking about this. What about Inkshield?
Yeah, I mean, it's close, right?
Like I don't feel
Inkshield is 2 colors, so it's not in every deck.
Right.
But it goes in every black-white deck. And if you cast it, having done nothing, if it's narrow, it's narrower than Teferi's Protection. But it will win you the game after, and like you didn't do anything.
And it fits your earlier example of like, if a lot of times the only way to stop it is a counterspell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I don't know. A lot of decks, I'm not sure what they're supposed to do. Maybe just, hey, I have 28 power, but I'm only going to attack you for 7, thinking you got Inkshield and hope that I can live through the crackback of 14.
14 in the air is still pretty big crackback.
I'll probably still lose that game, even though I'm trying to play around it, but what can I do?
Right.
Yeah, I feel like 6s are ill-equipped to deal with an Inkshield, and it might fall into... It's not as good as Teferi's Protection, but it might, just the way it's positioned, might...
That's interesting, yeah. And it's like, if you cast it at the right time, you win that game.
Yeah.
Like,
it's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's more narrow than Teferi's Protection, but again, it doesn't cost much other than holding up 5.
I mean, there's been a lot of games I've been in where I'm like, oh man, they might have Inkshield. And then I think,
what do I do?
What do I do knowing that? Like, let's imagine they showed it to me. And your brain goes through the options and you're like,
hit him with 1 a turn.
Yeah, what do I do? Like, I don't have a good option in my green-red deck to do anything about it, so I either choose to attack them with just 1 creature, which gives them more turns to try and draw the Inkshield, or I just hope they don't have it here.
Yeah.
But it's not like I didn't consider it, but what can I do? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
You fog back.
Yeah.
Fog your combat. Counter their thing.
You attack, and then you go, crap, Blasphemous Act, I guess.
Yeah, you Mazavith, your biggest thing. I don't know. Teferi's Protection and those kind of things live in an interesting place where white is getting these pieces that blue has, that red has, that black has.
Yeah.
And
that are hard to interact with.
That are really hard to interact with. Okay, up next we are going to talk about some of the more controversial cards in the format. Very powerful permanents, highly interactive. If they're not careful, they can take a whole deck out of a game if they're not ready for it. But we're going to get to those after a few words from our sponsors.
It is my great honor to present the new Command Zone Gym. It's a little bit of a work in progress.
It's where New Year's resolutions go to die.
No, not this year, because I've got a secret weapon.
Achievable goals?
Nope. It's RAYCON wireless earbuds. I've got my 2024 motivation playlist ready to keep me on track and hyped up all year, and there's no better way to listen than with my RAYCONs. Their everyday earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever. I use them everywhere, but they're particularly nice for working out. RAYCON's perfect in-ear fit means they never fall out in the middle of a run. Plus, with 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life, I don't have to worry about my hype music cutting out while I'm pumping iron. Best of all, they come at half the price of other premium brands, so even if your resolution was to save money this year, RAYCONs are still the way to go. I like using them in noise isolation mode to really focus. That way it's just me and my jams.
Does that mean the gym doesn't have a sound system?
Rachel, with RAYCONs, the world is your sound system.
So that's a no.
Correct. Go to buyraycon.com/command today to get 15% off your RAYCON order plus free shipping. That's buyraycon.com/command to score 15% off and free shipping. Again, buyraycon.com/command. Dang it, I cannot make this work.
What are we looking at here?
I just can't beat Kang the Conqueror. He's a new villain they released in Marvel Strike Force, and he uses time mastery to manipulate his opponent's speed. Shang-Chi and Captain Marvel are my best heroes, but he's too tough. He shrugs them off like they're nothing.
There's your problem. You can't just rely on individual strong characters. You need to pay attention to the mechanics and the synergies. It's like an engine. All the parts have to work together. Try pairing Rogue with Gambit. Together, they can beat Kang to the punch and shut him down before time runs out.
Sounds great, but I still need to unlock Rogue.
Don't worry. In Marvel Strike Force, there's always another way to get the job done. What I do is pair Dr. Doom with Spider-Weaver. Spider-Weaver makes it hard for her team to get hit, so Doom can build up an army of Doom bots. Then bang! No more Kang.
See? It's all about the strategy.
Okay, so what if I use the Eternals, but I pair them with Loki? He speeds up Cersei so she can soften Kang up, and then Icarus comes in, hits like a truck.
Now you're getting it.
Sounds like a well-oiled machine.
Okay, Kang, prepare to get wrecked.
Marvel Strike Force. Click the link in the description and download it now for free.
Are you guys done with my car yet?
Oh no, this engine is totaled.
We beat Kang though.
What? How? He runs me over every time.
All right, welcome back. We are talking about the cards that change the power level of your deck all by themselves, and this next section is, it's a doozy.
The next category that we're talking about is hate cards, and this was sort of an interesting name. For me, the definition of these are permanents that prevent certain kinds of decks or certain things from happening when they're on the battlefield. So they either have to be removed for certain decks to participate, or they have to be removed for any deck to participate.
Yeah. So similar to Stacks or something, but not exactly the same.
Not exactly. Like, I think Stacks fits in this category, but it doesn't encompass this whole category. So this first one I consider like combat hate cards. And this for me is Glacial Chasm, which says that it's just damage, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you, and it is a cumulative upkeep, and your stuff can't attack, which most of the time isn't a downside in decks that play this. And then Constant Mists, which is a fog with buyback.
Yeah, buyback is sacrifice a land, so you can late game fog forever, more or less.
Yeah. You can just fog 5-6 turns in a row until you set up.
You're green, you probably are getting land ramp out there,
Or you have plenty of it. And both of these are very, very difficult to interact with. You need either land destruction or a counterspell.
Yep.
And they turn off combat decks.
And combat decks encompass most, a big portion of the format are, what is their main plan? Kill you with creatures.
Yeah.
We just talked about this back in the day, and I think Commander is in a different spot now than it was then, about if you're a combat-based deck, you better have a plan in your deck that can win in a different way so that you can beat these cards, because I used to play them a lot. Now I almost never play them now for the reason we're going to talk about.
I think these are the kind of the opposite of Mystic Remora, where they're almost better in casual, and then they get worse as they get more competitive, which are the really frustrating cards to place.
You're right. It is the inverse of Mystic Remora, because if you play these in 6s, they will have no answer and just feel like nothing in my deck matters against that card. But in a CEDH, they're going to laugh at a Constant Miss because it doesn't matter. They're not going to attack you for the win anyway.
Yeah.
And they have a million counterspells running around anyway, so they have a lot of ways to interact with it. So it's like, you're going to try and cast that every turn? Good luck.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to strip mine yourself every turn? Great.
Yeah.
Keep yourself busy.
So it's not that they, I'm sure maybe there are CEDH fringe ones that run a card or two, but I'm just saying they have answers. They're running strip mines, they're running wastelands, they're running waste, because they are like, we need answers to all kinds of different things. But that's not how, really casual decks think. So, it's great you call these out, because if you've listened to Command Zone over the years, we used to talk about these cards a lot, and we never talk about them now. And that's not because they're not good anymore. It's because we stopped playing them because for the same reasons. Like, these can only go in higher power level decks. It's not that fun to make it so my opponents can't feel like nothing they're doing matters.
They interact on an 8 level, but they interact with 6 level, which is very frustrating. So I just don't think they're great decks for them in Commander. Like, they're very powerful. Like, you could put Glacial Chasm, I guess, in like an 8 Enchantress deck, but I don't love putting them honestly in any Commander deck.
Yeah, I don't think I run either anymore. I might run Constant Miss in my really high couple of high powered decks, but that's about it. Yeah.
Okay, I have a Windgrace Planeswalkers deck, and I don't run Constant Miss because it's like, ugh.
It would also be good in Glacial Chasm because
you can keep reanimating it.
The best way to use Glacial Chasm is actually to sack it and then play it as your land for turn with Crucible of Worlds, so you don't have to keep paying more life. Okay, the next hate cards we're going to talk about are Repeatable Edicts. So Grave Pact, Dictate of Erebos. These are two big ones. What's the creature that does it? Butcher Malakir?
This is Butcher Malakir,
which is, I think, less offensive just because it is a creature and it's more CMC.
It's 7 mana,
Yeah. But these two cards, Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos, there's a lot of decks in the form that just can't beat it because you can, if you're a Voltron deck, done. You can never keep a creature on the board. You're not going to play enough creatures to be able to keep up with however many they're sacking. And they do kind of often tend to be like repeatable board wipes.
Yeah.
So it's just like everyone goes, because it's like, I don't want to play any creatures because they're just going to die. Unless I can get 20 out all at once, which my deck's not built to do, so what the heck am I supposed to do here?
Right. It's also the kind of card that it's just like, okay, my deck cannot play until I draw this.
Yep. Until I draw Disenchant or a variant of Disenchant.
Like one of 3 or 4 cards in my deck.
Yeah.
I hope I draw it. Here we go. So I feel like if you're running this level of very intense interaction, I expect that your deck is an 8 and is interacting with 8 level stuff.
Yeah. It's hard for me to imagine a Grave Pact in a 6 for sure.
For sure, yeah.
Probably not a 7 either, yeah.
If it's in a 7, it's a 7.5. It's a highly interactive 7. Where it's like, it's sort of hard to have a sacrifice deck that's honestly a 6. So like, it depends. Aristocrats are just very synergistic these days. But yeah, I think Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos tip your deck certainly on the high end of casual.
Fun thing to note is we outlaw these cards in game nights.
Yep.
And extra turns. And that's not power level, because I think we play close to 8 for a lot of that stuff. It's more about annoyance when editing.
Yeah.
Because there's so many triggers. Every time something happens, this happens, then this other thing happens. It's just like, ugh. And it's so
also
easy.
It's not fun to watch. Just nothing happens.
Yeah, it just causes stagnant games where everyone's just sitting there staring at each other.
Yeah.
Because the player that has Grave Pact is incentivized to sack whatever creatures they got to stop everybody else from having creatures. So they often don't have very many creatures. So even they are not doing a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a stall. And speaking of stall, Aura Shards.
Oof.
So
it's almost like you made a list of all the cards that I don't play anymore that I used to.
I'm the ghost of Commander games past for Josh.
We're just a month late, that's all. Yeah.
Ebenezer. This section is artifact and enchantment hate.
Yep.
So Aura Shards is specifically repeatable, simple removal for every artifact and enchantment on the battlefield, except itself.
So I have a funny story about this card.
Yeah.
When we first were starting, and I think we didn't even do the podcast yet. I was just first learning Commander. Like maybe the second or third time I played. Like I played the first night, and I don't do that great because I took a Nekusar Precon and I was like, I'll turn it into a 5-color Chromat deck. And then I added a bunch of cards to it that weren't very synergistic because I didn't know Commander very well, like Fleece Mainline. And so then I have fun, but I don't do very well. So of course I get on the internet like the next day and I come across Aura Shards. I'm like, I need this card. And I'm like calling shops in LA, like, do you have Aura Shards? No. And I find a shop like up in Valencia and I have to drive like all the way up to this shop.
So far.
Yeah. I'm way up there and I'm like, it's in this industrial park and it doesn't really have a sign. And I like knock on a building and I walk in. I'm like, is this whatever name? And they're like, no, that's like 3 over. Okay. And I go in and I get there and I'm like, do you guys have Aura Shards? Because I called earlier and the guy's like, I think we have it. I'm like, well, I talked to somebody. They said you had it. And he's like, who'd you talk to? I don't know. So So he's like, did anybody here talk to an Aura Shard? And I thought I drove all the way up there for nothing, but the guy was like, oh yeah, I talked to you. Hold on, I'll go get it. Yeah. And that's how I bought my first Aura Shards. There you go.
And then you played it once, and they're like, okay, well, I guess I'll go home then.
It was sweet, and I was like,
It's
this card's
awesome.
insane. And then I got that feeling. But listen, I don't want anybody to think I learned quickly.
Yeah.
It took a while.
It's very, very powerful. And
you don't draw it every game.
Yeah, like this is the kind of card that you look at and you're like, wow, that lets me do everything and it's exactly my plan. I'm going to use it. And you do. And then you play against your opponent's enchantment deck and they're like, okay, well, I'm out of the game then. And I'll just sit, like I can't cast anything in my hand until I draw a removal spell for that.
Yep.
And then you're like, does it
free.
feel like you won that game? You just like deleted a player. Like you deleted an opponent with this narrow card.
It's so ubiquitous too. I don't even think it's about enchantment decks or artifact decks. You just, at this point, you're just like, play creature, pick off mana rock, play creature, pick off mana rock. And they're like, okay, so even if I destroy that thing now, you have 9 mana and we all have 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Like, how exactly are we supposed to come back in this game?
So in this category, I also put Collector Oof, just so we've mentioned it. It turns off the activated abilities of all artifacts. So most of the time, it's in a land ramp deck. So you have all your lands. You're not using rocks.
It's in green.
You turn off all your opponent's rocks, and you're like, great, I did it. But I want to make the point that I don't think you have to be able to interact with this.
Collector Oof's not as bad though because
you can remove it at least.
Once you remove it, you go.
Yeah.
Aura Shard is like, I finally removed it. I don't have anything left though.
Yeah, I have to rebuild now.
Yeah.
I can't rebuild until I remove it.
Yeah, Collector was like, I can't use this stuff, but once I kill it, it's back online.
Right. I can play it and then remove stuff. You should run Bane of Progresses that just enters the battlefield and destroys all artifacts and enchantments. If that's advantageous to you, you should run
don't have a
Austere
lot of
Command.
artifacts and enchantments. Yeah.
That's a very good thing for you to put into your deck. But the difference is when you cast a Bane of Progress and you blow up all this stuff,
it's done.
Now they can rebuild.
Yeah.
When you play in Aura Shards, they cannot rebuild until the Aura Shards is gone.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference for me. It operates like a Grave Pact.
Let me ask you, Aura Shards on our
where does it go?
On our impromptu tier list, is it Jessica's will?
I don't know. It's Grave Pact. I hate it.
What's great? It's Grave Pact.
Just don't play
Where did
it.
Grave Pact go?
I don't know. It's like
you said you couldn't really. Maybe you could be like 7.5, but
I think you're probably an 8 if you're playing in Aura Shards because you're expecting they have to interact with you, and 8s are at least expecting that they have to interact with their opponents. 6s and 7s I feel like are just like, yeah, we're racing cars.
Yeah,
and we might interact so we don't die.
It's just how car racing works. I don't know. I never raced a car, so yeah.
That's car racing or horse racing. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, we only interact when we have to so we don't die. That seems right.
And Aura Shard says no, you have to interact to play.
Yeah.
So it feels like it has to be 8 level interaction.
I don't know if I'm going to ruin something later. Oh, no, I am. I won't say it yet.
Okay.
It reminds me of another card we're going to talk about in a second, though.
The next section is Graveyard Hate.
Yep.
So this is on board. This is Rest in Peace, where if you're a graveyard deck, you have to remove that thing in order to play your game. So Douthie Voidwalker, Rest in Peace, Leyline of the Void, all of these I feel like fall into this category. It's permanent base interaction that they have to interact with.
Yeah. Rest in Peace I don't really play. It's similar to Aura Shards for me in that it's a hard to remove card type and says no, just shut off. Douthie is getting close to Jessica's will for me, where I probably do still have it in a 7 or 2, but in general, I've chosen not to put it in new decks I'm building so I don't push their power level too high.
Yeah.
And it is a card where I feel you can justifiably play it in any deck with black. But at least it is a creature, and that isn't the easiest card type to remove.
Right.
It's got that going for it, but it often does just sort of turn off decks. I think Deathrite Shaman is in this mold, but totally fine. But it often will kind of turn off your opponent's decks, but at least it's 1 card per turn.
Right. Interaction, totally fine. Even Scavenging Ooze, Bojuka, do it. You should have these things.
Yeah.
But having permanent base stuff, while powerful, doesn't exactly make your games more fun and doesn't exactly I don't know. I feel like if you're running for permanent based interaction, you're a 7 or an 8, a high 7 or an 8.
Yeah, when somebody Bojuka bogs you, you're often like, oh.
I have to rebuild.
But when somebody Rests in Pieces, it's often like, oh, this is over. My deck is done.
Yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
I'm playing black. I don't have any removal for it.
Do you think any of those cards change the power level of your deck? And if so, which changes it the most? Like, is there any you consider not playing due to power level?
I don't play Douthie in my 7s. I would run it in 8s because it's great. And Rest in Peace is like, for me, it's an 8 level type of interaction. Because it's just like you expect that level of interaction when you're playing that powerfully. But I don't expect permanent-based stuff that I have to remove at 6s and 7s.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, the next category is cards that hate on lands.
Yeah. Like, these first few are non-basic lands, but...
Yeah, this first one is the one that I was comparing to Aura Shards, which is Blood Moon.
Yeah.
Which is, I can't do anything.
Okay.
And what I hate about Blood Moon is it also stops my lands from giving me the mana I would need to remove the Blood Moon. Mm. Like, now I can't even hope that I draw a disenchant. I mean, obviously you can have some basics, but if you just don't, and, you know, we don't run a ton of basics in multicolored decks because, you know, what are you going to do? Build your deck to beat one card?
Yeah.
So if you just don't happen to have it, you're just like, so hope somebody removes it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like free counterspells for me. Like, there are certain power levels where I expect to play against free counterspells, and there are certain power levels where I expect I could play against a Blood Moon.
Yeah.
Where, like, I'll fetch a basic, I'll try and make sure that I have those. Like, you just...
But out of 6 and a 7, you're not
supposed
to worry about
to play around Blood Moon.
Yeah.
I'm just playing my lands.
Yeah.
I'm not fetching to find basics.
Right.
Like, if I'm playing against a mono red deck and an 8 pod, I am playing around Blood Moon.
Right. That's true.
And, like, give me a chance, you know?
Right.
Like, if you're just playing a 5-color, like, 6, then you're hosed.
You're just totally hosed. Yeah. Back to Basics is similar.
Yeah.
Where do you put Winter Orb?
Yeah, that's like 8s. Like, I don't expect to be interacted with on that axis in a 7.
I can't imagine playing a 6 that had a Winter Orb in it.
Certainly not
it's
a 6.
It's so weird. It would be so weird.
But even a 7, I feel like this pushes you into 8.
Yeah.
Where you're interacting permanently.
You're twisting the game in a way that 7s aren't. That's not really what they're looking for in general.
Yeah. Next category is Draw Hate. This is Narset, Parter of Veils, or even like a Notion Thief, previously Hull Breacher. Anything that says, oh, you thought you were going to draw, but you're not. Either I'm going to draw or nobody's going to draw.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think about the Hull Breacher thing, but we do have a big signpost from the RC saying that this sort of category is dangerous and, you know, just kind of keep an eye on it. And that is how they sort of do the ban list, or they think about the ban list, or at least used to, which is we're not going to ban everything in this category, but we might ban a marquee thing as sort of a big flag that says, hey, stuff like this you should maybe think about, which is what we're talking about today. And... yeah, I would say Notion Thief and Narset both fall into the Jessica's Will category for me, where I, you know, not that I would never play them, but I certainly am aware, like Douthie Voidwalker we just talked about, of the power level I want my deck to end up at. And if it's 7 or below, I wouldn't include either of these cards. How about you?
No, certainly not. If I was playing an 8, sure, yeah. Especially if you're playing like a high power wheel deck, like those are the kind of things that you expect to play against. Not my favorite thing to play against, but I would expect it in a high power one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't expect it. Certainly at a 6, probably not at a 7. Although I have seen like Notion Thief in like a flashy blue-black deck.
At least it's a creature and can be interacted with.
Yeah.
Narset is a planeswalker, which is not that difficult to kill. You usually can attack them with creatures. So the one thing I'd say they have going for them are you know, of the easier to remove permanent types.
They're not Hull Breacher for sure.
Yeah, but the decks that can go, you know, Narset Wheel. That's just not a thing I think that I want to do at sort of mid-power levels.
Definitely not at 7, yeah. The final card on this list is Drannith Magistrate.
So this is the one-off sort of, it is a hate card,
Yeah.
but it doesn't fit in the other categories.
It hates Commander? The fact that you can lock people's commanders in the command zone make this a card that you just do not expect to run against in a 6 or a 7, in my opinion.
Yeah. I do think 7s need to be able to kill creatures.
They do, yeah.
But like, yeah, you'll have to be able to do that early. It kind of sucks. Yeah, it is. It just interacts with the format in a really weird way.
It's not the worst hate bear in the world, and again, it's on a creature, so you are gonna hopefully have Swords to Plowshares. That is expected, and in 6s and 7s, but
maybe not a high enough density to deploy those in time.
Yeah.
It is kind of like Winter Orb, maybe, where in 7 and below, I don't expect the rules of the game to be changed in this way.
Right.
Where it's like, hey, you can't cast commanders, and hey, your lands don't work.
And you're like, what? They always work.
Yeah, but in 8s and above, you kind of, that's sort of part of what you're signing up for.
It's
It's like,
fair game.
okay, now from here on up, we expect that you're ready for everything, or at least in some respects. And even 8s aren't necessarily ready for super fast combo stuff. So they're not ready for everything, but at least, you don't get to hide behind, it's a land that's messing me up. You got to be able to deal with the land somehow, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. The sort of elephant in the room that we haven't talked about is tutors.
Which I think are honestly one of the ways that I've kept my power level in check the most over the last 4 years or so. And I've talked about it on the show, probably not in a long time, but one of the changes I made for game nights, and I think if you watch game nights, it'd be easy to not notice, but for a long, long time, I just didn't run any tutors. I stopped running tutors. I felt like that was a really easy way for me to just sort of make sure decks didn't get specifically up above 8.
Yeah.
It's just hard to be, in a lot of ways, it's difficult to be above an 8 with no tutors in your deck, because above 8 is usually implying combo wins. And without tutors, reliably getting combo wins is difficult. So I love this category as a way to think about just capping your deck's power level. If you just say, I'm not going to have tutors. And we're not saying don't play tutors. You can still play some and still be an 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the consistency they give you is really, what sort of determines the power level. And it is a little bit in the category of density, right? Like how many you've got.
Yeah, there's fine at anything tutors as black tutors that we're used to playing against, right? Like demonic tutor and vampiric tutor, and even to some extent like entomb.
Yeah.
All of those we play against all the time, and I feel like if you have one of those, it doesn't really change the power level of your deck. But if you start to run 2 or even 3, it feels like to me that there's something specific you're looking for. Now, there's a reason to run a ton of tutors, which often indicates a combo deck, which just means your deck is more powerful.
Yep.
Plus, having 3 tutors makes your deck so consistent. You have ramp when you need it. You have card draw when you need it. You have a Wincon, a board wipe when you need it. It just makes your deck more powerful, more consistent.
Yeah. Oh, you got the win in hand? Go find the protection for the win. Oh, you've got the protection without win? Go find the win. Yeah.
It's that level of consistency that tutors offer make them very sort of seductive in the format, and can really raise the power level of your deck. So I think running 1 is kind of fun. It's fun to have tutors, but running more than that, and I expect your deck is probably an 8.
Yeah, I think you probably could have 2 and still be a 7, but it really does depend on what's the rest of your deck. You probably, it's hard to have 3 and not start to be towards an 8.
Demonic vampiric, I feel like, is...
I think if you purposely are I'm just not going to have any combos that can occur that are, less than 4 cards.
Yeah.
Because it's almost impossible to build a deck that won't combo once you get up towards the right 5 or 6 cards, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, at a certain point, synergy becomes combo. But if you say, listen, my deck doesn't have any 2-card combos and maybe no 3-card combos either, then you can maybe run 3 tutors and still be at a 7. But once you're 3 is even pushing it. Yeah. Once you're above 4, I think, there's just no way to be. Yeah. I would highly recommend to people who are worried about power level and want to stay low, cut them all.
Put in card draw.
Yeah. Your decks will still be great. Listen, you've watched me play on game nights for years and years. You probably didn't even notice it. My decks still look pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun. Just don't run tutors.
What I like about not running tutors is it means I have to figure out how to win.
Yeah.
It's this is what I got. So how do I win with this?
Yep.
Tutors says I'm going to go find the thing that makes me win.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the puzzle that not having tutors gives you. And we haven't mentioned the more specific tutors.
Yeah, I was going to say, those ones are demonic, vampiric. They are get anything at any time. Do you feel the same way about narrow tutors? Enlightened tutor can only find enchantment or artifact. Mystical tutor. We're not making any distinction between where the tutor goes, you'll notice, and I don't think there is a big one. Vampiric going to top of library versus demonic going to hand. One is definitely better and more powerful, but they don't intrinsically power level change your deck because you still get to find the card you're looking for when you need it. But how differently do you assess the narrow stuff? Can only find a creature or whatever.
It's kind of weird, but my gut reaction to that is they're more scary. Is that weird? Because if you're running it...
I can't make a mistake.
If you're running it, I feel like you know what you're looking for. If you're running Mystical Tutor, there's a spell you're looking for.
Yeah.
There's a reason, there's a specific artifact, there's a specific enchantment.
I mean, it could be that you just aren't in black.
Could be. Then you're all right, I just run a suite of sort of artifacts or enchantments.
I have 15 to 20 spells. I know I'm going to want one of them. Yeah.
But it makes me sort of more suspicious. Most of the time, I think they're all kind of the same. Like, if you're running any tutor under, like, 2 mana and under, I treat all of those the same. It is about the number that you're playing.
I totally agree. I don't make any distinction between Enlightened Tutor and Vampiric Tutor, Mystical Tutor and Demonic Tutor. How many tutors is more important to the power level of your deck than the narrowness of those tutors. The only exception I might make is like Steel Shaper's Gift or something like that. Yeah. Because equipment is kind of capped as to the most powerful thing you could get. So as long as you don't have an equipment-based 2-card combo, of which I'm not aware, then it's fine to run like a Steel Shaper's Gift to say, I would like to have 2 Skull Clamps in my deck. It obviously depends on what else is going on. But if you're doing that, there's a good chance you're not a 7 either. You'd probably be an 8 because you're like,
great.
Skull Clamp is an amazing card, and having 2 of it is
really
cheating.
Good.
Yeah.
Speaking of Skull Clamp, I do think Urza's Saga goes on this list.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I like that you put that down here.
is a tutor. It's a second Soul Ring. It's a second Skull Clamp. It's a second Shadow Spear. That just also
top.
Yep. Tons and tons of really, really powerful Ozolith can all come out of this. And I think Urza's Saga is like a very difficult to interact with tutor that is really easy to recur and can find you some of the most powerful stuff in your deck. It's almost like having a Mana Crypt. Because
absolutely.
It's a second Soul Ring.
Absolutely. I wouldn't put it in the Mana Crypt tier myself personally. I put it in the Jessica's Will tier.
I agree.
But
it's slower than that.
But it is on that list. It's not like whatever the cards were that were below the Jessica's Will tier. Sorry to those cards. I forgot
we talked about a lot of cards.
Yeah, but I totally agree. What do you feel about Survival of the Fittest?
Oh, that's multiple tutors.
Yeah.
Now it's a combo deck.
Yeah.
I think Survival is like an 8 type of card. For me, that's mana drain. Like, I don't expect to play against Survival in a 6 or a 7.
Yeah, it's so. I think the expense takes it out of the range of like your player, because it takes some skill to play as well, because the card you're choosing to discard versus what you're going to get in what order and things like that.
Usually there's a very specific line.
Yeah, and people that know those lines and can afford Survival of the Fittest, that couldn't possibly be a 6. But you could imagine a deck which a new player and their brother gave them the card and they just slotted it in there and they're just big stompy stuff where Survival would probably be fine. Yeah, switch to this one for that one is not that big a deal. But those are in theory. In reality, that deck probably doesn't exist.
There's very few of those executions of Survival, I would think. The final category that of cards we're going to talk about is Wincons. The most conspicuous of which is just combo Wincons. Most of the time, I think if you're running any sort of A plus B combo, like 2 cards, if you assemble them, you win the game. I would consider your deck an 8. Like, I would just put you there.
Especially if one of the 2 cards is your commander.
Yes. My gosh.
So if you're running Curiosity and it's an Imizit, your deck can't be a 7.
Yeah.
I don't care what else is going on. If you're running Kiki Jiki and you've got
I can't think of
Zealous Conscripts, then your deck can't be a 7 probably. Like, it's just
Tivit and Time Civ.
Yeah. Those are just easy to assemble with a card you're guaranteed to get. So you only need to find the one other card, especially if you've got any amount of tutors plus that other card. Yeah. I agree. And then there are other cards that, even not in conjunction with your commander, they combo with enough other things in your deck. Like Thassa's Oracle is the big one, right? And obviously in the sort of S tier conversation of like, if you have Thassa's Oracle in your deck, I just can't imagine that you're a 6.
No. Yeah. I've played against the closest thing to a 7 or 8 Thassa's Oracle. It's just like a wheels thing that wins with Thassa's Oracle. But even that deck, that was like, it was like Xyrus that makes all the
janky.
snakes.
Oh, yeah.
And it cast a bunch of wheels and drew their deck and like won with the Thassa's Oracle.
Way.
Yeah. Like, that's kind of a fair way. We were still like,
the deck's really good.
You're like, okay, I guess we lose to an Thassa's Oracle, I suppose.
It wasn't combo, but still we died.
But you're like, still, I don't love that. Like, it still requires a counterspell for me to have stopped that.
Yeah, and Thassa's Oracle is templated in such a way it's even hard to stop with a counterspell sometimes. Where it's just like, I've definitely been playing where I'm like, hey, CEDH people, when do I do the thing here?
Yeah, at what point?
Yeah.
Do I counter this or that?
Yeah, it feels like if I do this, they still win, right?
Yeah. You're like, yeah. It's Thassa's Oracle for me is not a super fun Wincon to play against in 7s. Although technically I have seen one.
I've never seen that. I don't have Thassa's Oracle in the single deck. It's just not my play style because I don't really play combo much. But
I also don't like alternate Wincons all that much.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of myself. What about Food Chain? This is another classic combo card.
If it combos with your commander, you're automatically an 8.
Well, Food Chain, it doesn't combo with your commander, but does.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the one that like Food Chain? You can Food Chain Prosh.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it combos with most commanders in that like it will often be
give you
like,
the mana
to cast it again. Where they're like, go to remove it if it's on your turn, and you're like, cool, sack it, replay it now.
Yeah.
It is. You never see it really
There's
just played as a good
food
card.
Chain. Yeah, no.
Yeah, that's true.
If you're playing Food Chain, you're doing something with it. I don't trust you.
And it is fast mana as well.
Yeah.
So okay.
I always forget it's just fast mana.
Yeah, it just is.
Yeah.
Here's a new one.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this one because it's interesting. It's Displacer Kitten.
Yeah. Oh man, this card's so good.
It's very difficult to interact with.
Yep.
It's very easy to combo with.
Yep. On accident.
And it feels like it's not the kind of thing that I'm prepared to interact with in a 7. And I can't really think of a 7, like a blink deck that you like a value Displacer Kitten is still, I don't know. You're still playing enough non-creature spells to trigger this thing.
You'll almost certainly accidentally find infinite combos in the value ETB deck.
Yeah.
Or value spell deck. Yeah. You'll just be like, oh, I didn't even think of this. I can do this now. And just like...
It turns into a paradox engine most of the time.
Yeah. And that's been my experience with it. And I basically stopped. It's in the Jessica's Will category for me.
Yeah.
Where it's in the very powerful... Like, I'll play this in a very powerful deck, but man, it's too powerful for 7s.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
Okay. So, I mean, that's like... there's one more category that's sort of one-card combos. Well, I guess... What do you want to talk about first? The one-card combos or the, like, cusp Wincons?
Oh, the cusp ones are interesting because...
Yeah.
Okay, Approach of the Second Sun.
Yeah. I don't want to play against that in a 7. Because it requires a counterspell, and even then it doesn't require a count. Like, it doesn't work.
This card is just badly designed from a lot of reasons.
There's no way to interact with it.
It just feels like, oh, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like... My deck just doesn't have the tools, and maybe my color doesn't have the tools to deal with that. So
you have to counter what's cast from your hand, and you've cast it. Even if you counter it, it doesn't work.
The second time.
The second time. The first, you have to counter the first time.
The second time, you just see it coming, and you got to like, I think you can like bounce it back to their hand or something.
Yeah, you can remand it and recast it and win that turn.
Yeah, you got to like force them to shuffle in some way, or
mill them. It's just not an access that you're prepared to fight on in a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
It's like, and I guess if you could win that way in an 8, but I
don't like it. What about Torment of Hailfire?
I could see this in a 7, but I don't love it. Because again, it's like all you had to do was make a bunch of mana in a black deck, which isn't that hard, required powerful cards to do anyway, probably, and requires a counterspell to stop.
It's interesting. I think a lot of these cards, and you called this out early, fall into the category of can't interact with unless I have a counterspell.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of what we've talked about today, neither of us like. And Torment is another card that I played for a while and was the rage and was a big win condition in black decks for a long time. And not just me, but many people started pulling back. You don't see it as much as you used to because those wins don't feel great.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's just like, did I survive long enough to get this spell off? And it's like, you can win the game in a lot of ways. I'd rather win it, strategically in some way. Mm-hmm. Not anybody that likes it is totally fine to play, and I still lose to it sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't get mad about it or anything, but I personally don't get a lot of satisfaction from playing it. But yeah, I think that is a common denominator that we've found through this discussion that I didn't really think about before. Just that stuff that feels like if I don't have a counterspell, I don't have a way to interact with this. Not because I don't have it in my hand, but because the game doesn't give me that tool, really. Maybe there's a fringe Tybalt's Trickery or whatever, but those are so few and far between that. I really just... Was I lucky enough to draw that card? First of all, was it smart enough to put it in my deck or lucky enough to put it in my deck? Was I lucky enough to draw it? And then, was it correct for me to hold on and wait until they cast Approach of the Second Sun, or did I fire my Tybalt's Trickery off on something else because I didn't want to die to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
These are the kind of like, they're cusp ones where it's like, I could see these in 7s. I have seen them in 7s. I just don't love them because it's not something that you're prepared to interact with.
Yeah, if you just put a Torment of Hellfire into your otherwise black and green deck, I don't think it makes it an 8. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just sort of like, I guess.
What about Craterhoof Behemoth?
I don't put Crater Hoof in a lot of my decks anymore.
Yeah.
Even my decks where it's going to win, just because it's like, I don't know, there's lots of overruns, and Crater Hoof just feels like the easiest to tutor for and the easiest to get into play and the easiest to win with. And so I just don't run it. But the interesting thing about Crater Hoof is I'm tempted to run it more lately, because when you run like Kamal, which is similar, but it gives just like a +3/+3 in trample, there's so much more math.
Yeah. You have to think about it. Okay, they got blocked with this. Pareto is just like, play it. I'm pretty sure I win.
I got like 30. Can anybody block 300 damage? Yeah. And they're like, no. So you just win.
When you're like, okay, I have 82 damage to split up. They are at a combined total of 74 life, but there's 4 blockers. That has a 6 power tough. Okay, I gotta. Yeah. That's totally a good point.
So it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know. Crater Hoof, you still assembled the board. You did the thing. Go ahead. Sure.
I've gone up and down with Crater Hoof.
Yeah.
Because I felt the same way for a long time. And a lot of this is because we do gameplay videos and I don't want the same ending a lot.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, I won a game with Crater Hoof. I don't want to. So I'd be building another token deck even months later and be like, it's going wide. I would normally put Crater Hoof here, but I'm going to do Triumph of the Hordes because at least and then I did that. It's like, okay, I'm going to do Beastmaster Ascension. Yeah. And now I'm like, whatever. I'm going to play a card that says, hey, if I've got 12 creatures, I probably can win right now. And if it's Crater Hoof, I don't feel that bad about it, because how much more creative am I being if I say Beastmaster Ascension or
Overwhelming Stampede?
Yeah, come on. There's a whole bunch to choose from now. They're all basically equivalent. Crater Hoof's just kind of the best one, but in most situations, it'll win you in the same situations as the others. So I don't want to think that hard sometimes about the win con. It's more about how I get there.
Yep.
So I've come back around to like, okay, Crater Hoof's okay.
That's kind of where I landed too. Where I don't play it in any decks right now. But yeah, I probably just put it in, and it's like, it doesn't.
I think your deck can still be a 7 and have Crater Hoof in it too, because the setup required, and it's combat. It's creatures and combat. This is the thing that 6s and 7s should know is coming and be prepared for.
Right.
Blood Moon, they don't know is coming and aren't going to be prepared for, and shouldn't necessarily. So yeah.
This is something I just thought of. Is like, I feel like when somebody plays a Blood Moon and you're playing a 6, it's like if you were playing Modern and somebody cast Force of Will. You're like, what?
What?
You can do that? Like, that's what it feels like sometimes.
I didn't even know that I had to worry about that.
What? I wasn't even, but I had so many other options. Oh, man. We wanted to take a quick moment to talk about the cards that don't necessarily change your deck's power level. Like, these cards are some that maybe are overrated to the point where people think that they change your deck's power level, and it doesn't really impact it all that much.
Yeah. I think dual lands are the classic one. So the original dual lands, Tropical Island, Volcanic Island, Underground Sea, Tundra, all the ones with blue, of course.
Yeah.
But counting Plateau and Badlands as well.
Yeah, those two.
Yeah. A lot of people will see those, and this is the money, the price aspect, which we'll talk about in a second, I think getting mixed up with power level. But I think you take almost any deck, you take any land out, you put a tropical island in its place, and the power level is 0.01% different. It made no difference. Yeah, to the power level. And even if you did that for 3 lands, I still don't think your power level has noticeably changed. This might have been true 10 years ago, but we've gotten so many lands with land types now, so many triomes. Honestly,
Fixing is so much better than it used to be.
There are a lot of lands that are as good as dual lands, are so close that it's hard to tell the difference. The triomes, like, wouldn't you rather tap for 3 than 2? Yes, it comes into play tapped. There's a little give and take there.
That you need 2 lands in play for them to come in untapped.
So the battle bond lands are so good.
Yeah, there's so much fixing that it just doesn't meaningfully make a difference. Like, even fetch lands, which I think do change the power of your deck more than dual lands, don't change it all that much because the fixing is so good.
Yeah. Again, on game nights for a while, I just said, I'm not going to include dual lands in decks anymore because people were complaining about it.
Yeah, they're gone.
I played shocks instead, and you know what? I couldn't tell.
Doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
The next thing that we were talking about is like the really good wheels, like Wheel of Fortune or even Time Twister, just aren't that different from the 2nd through 5th wheel that you could play.
Yeah. Wheel of Fortune obviously really good, Time Twister obviously really good, but Windfall's also in there and basically equal. And there's so many wheels now. Wheels are interesting. We didn't talk about wheels a lot.
Yeah. I do think if you're playing like 10 wheels, then your deck feels more powerful.
They're kind of like one drop mana darks.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. I think to me, wheels are more about what's happening that's synergizing with the wheels,
Right, yeah.
than necessarily the wheels themselves. Because, what other... do you have Narset in there? It's a totally different thing.
Smothering Tithe.
Yeah. Do you have, is it an Ekusar deck or something where people are taking damage? Yeah, but the wheels themselves are not necessarily...
Yeah.
Like, again, you take any deck and you swap out a card and you put Wheel of Fortune in there, your deck's better, but it's not, like, insanely better.
It's not like $400 better or whatever.
Definitely
it
not.
these days.
Definitely not.
We talked about free spells, but I don't think the red, black, and white, the Deflecting Swat, Deadly Rollick, and Flawless maneuver of that cycle, certainly not the Fog, which I cannot
even think of the name of. The green one's not even worth mentioning. Yeah, nobody plays it.
Really change your deck all that much. Deflecting Swat is defensive a lot of the time, so it's protection piece. You can have those go nuts. Same with Flawless Maneuver. And even Deadly Rollick is like, it's a removal spell. What's the difference between 1 and 2 mana that you're going to pay on that removal spell?
Yeah. I think Deflecting Swat's probably my pick for the next best one after a Fierce Guardianship, but it still doesn't meet it's not even in the Jessica's Will tier. It is certainly makes your deck better, but by itself doesn't change the power level. Yeah. Deadly Rollick for sure not. I don't think so. Yeah. And Flawless Maneuvers, a good card, but I don't think it changes the power level.
There might even be better board protection than Flawless Maneuver. There's certainly is Teferi's protection.
Okay, so at the start we said, cards that change the power level of your deck. Mm-hmm. That was the name of this episode.
Yes.
And we talked about a lot of cards.
Yeah.
And I don't want the takeaway to be that we thought all of these cards changed the power level of your deck. Mm. I think we talked about our tiers. We kind of came up with that during the discussion. And how many of the cards we talked about today or any specific ones stand out to you that actually you think, change the power of your deck?
I mean, I think basically from that Mana Crypt tier up is kind of a lot, honestly, because we were talking about, especially when we start digging into those interaction pieces, like if you start talking about Back to Basics and Blood Moon and like all Rest in Peace, all of those I feel like automatically fight on an axis that 7s and below are not ready for.
Right.
It does mean that there's a lot of cards that are very, very powerful and do actually shift how your deck fights. But if we're talking about just the big ones for me are Mana Crypt, Dockside, Mana Drain, the One Ring.
Ad nauseum.
And Ad Nos up here. If Ad Nos is good, get out of here. You're doing something else.
Yeah.
Go up the ladder.
It doesn't really count because you don't just throw an Ad Nauseam into any deck. You can't.
Totally different.
But these other 4 cards you can.
Yeah, I think so.
You can throw them in any deck for sure.
Yeah, and if somebody casts a Mana Drain, that I'm like, I've totally misevaluated.
What were the 4? Dockside, One Ring, Mana Crypt.
Mana Drain.
I put Jeweled Lotus in there.
Jeweled Lotus, yeah.
That would be
agree.
my 5th, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are, and most of those are fast mana.
Most of them are fast mana. I think the primary difference between a 7 and an 8, and even between a 7 and an 8 is speed. I think that's going to be the biggest difference between a 7, they could have the exact same strategy, but if one has fast mana and one doesn't, or if one has free interaction and one doesn't, that's just a speed difference.
They're mostly trying to do similar things. What's just doing one faster?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think 8s are more efficient and therefore have more little bits and pieces left over to have more interaction. Mm-hmm. And that's the other sort of different is therefore they are able to fight through sort of more angles of attack. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so an 8 can maybe get around a Glacial Chasm or a Constant Miss or something way, and a 7 will have more trouble because it being less efficient leaves you with less a mana here, a mana there open, or I can still do something and leave my protection up to sort of, get around your Blood Moon or whatever when it comes out. Your Aura Shard comes out and just absolutely destroy me. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't really thought about that before our discussion, but there was a lot of things we kind of put just below this tier where I think it was kind of like, in the really old Batman movie with Michael Keaton where the Joker poisons all the stuff in all the grocery stores, but it's not like if you put on deodorant you die. It's like deodorant with lipstick and this will do it, and it's these weird combinations. And I feel like it's kind of that where it's like, Smothering Tithe doesn't fit the Mana Crypt thing where it pushes you automatically to this power level. But if you have Smothering Tithe plus ABC, you're starting to get there that are on this list. So it's not like, hey, you can't play Sorry, you can play whatever you want. I don't want to put it in those terms. But it's not like, for me, myself, to stay in a certain power level, I have to think about it as if I can't play these cards. It's just like, I can't have a critical mass of them that, if I want to still sort of be fair when I consider myself to be a 7 or whatever.
Right. And it's like, again, none of this is judgment calls on where you want to play. Josh and I love Commander and love playing and love powerful cards.
Yep.
Like, I built a vintage cube, so I had a place to put tons of like really sick cards that I wanted to play with. But in Commander, they're just harder to place because the more you play and the more you invest in a deck, the higher up the scale it pushes you. The more difficult it is, honestly, to find Commander games.
And in Commander, you feel a responsibility, hopefully, for the amount of fun that your opponents are having,
Absolutely.
too. And so, a lot of this is learned by us from having the games where we did the thing and it didn't feel great because everybody else reacted in a way that told you, oh, hey, it wasn't fun for them. And in a fair way, that's like, hey, we didn't expect that this is the type of fight we were getting into. And so, we're lucky now. We've cultivated our play group and, this place over many, many years. And, for the most part, that everybody knows what they're getting into. And we have a lot of people that self-regulate in the same way we do because we talk about these things all the time. This is our job and things like that. But not everybody has that. So I think hopefully this has helped, give people a little bit of guidance with how to think about it and how to have discussions with your play group about what you're interested in and what's okay. And maybe also try to decipher when people are upset, why that might be and what's causing that, because that's not a skill that everybody has either. And so, yeah, I think that's what I hope people get from this is that, I hope they don't get like Josh and Rachel are saying, do or don't play certain cards.
No.
Yeah.
Cards are sweet.
Yeah.
I'm not against playing any card.
Yeah. We have CDH all the way on down to just regular precons. You have a upgraded precon package of Lord of the Rings
They're off.
stuff.
Yeah.
That's like, and so you like to, and I do too. I love to play all the way up and down. I love limited so that I can play combat tricks and stuff sometimes, so that's a Swiss Army knife and I'm really playing with low powered stuff and seeing what I can do. And all the way up the scale is fun. And all that I really want is to make sure that the scale I'm currently at is matched by my opponents and we are like, oh, we're here today. Okay, now we're down here. You guys want to play there? All right, let's do that. And that's what we want. Yeah.
Yeah. And give you the tools to have these conversations because the power level is such a blurry thing. It's so hard to talk about. But if you know the cards that you're looking for and maybe your opponent said that there were 6 and you start to see some of these cards, it can help you not yell at them for calling their deck a 6. It's a relative thing. But you can recognize like, oh, maybe this person thinks of power level different than I do and I can evaluate their deck different in game. So you're like, all right, you played a couple of pieces that make me think your deck is more powerful. I'm going to send more attackers your way.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to adjust how I play against
I'm going to remove
deck.
your thing rather than this other person's thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also when you're telling people about your deck, these are cards we've talked about today that you might point out. I've had people do this and I love it when they do, where they're like, I've playing this deck and it's a 6, but it does have a this in it.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, cool. It's good to know that, you've got a Blood Moon in your deck. Although if they said that, I'd be like, wait a minute. I would. I just specifically Blood Moon against me, please don't do that.
But I will fetch carefully.
Yeah, but that's
knowing that there's a Blood Moon as a possibility.
Yeah, my deck's a whatever, but, I opened a One Ring and a Collector's Booster and it's in there. Okay, cool. That's great to know. So, yeah. Okay.
To the listeners, what do you think? Can a single card change a deck's power level? Do you agree with us that like those cards on that tier, if they're in the deck, you're like, that's pretty good.
Are there any cards that you disagree with us where we didn't put it in that tier and you think it belongs or vice versa?
Yeah. What cards do you think are just too powerful to be in a 6 commander deck? Any cards that we mentioned, of course, that you disagree with, that you're like, I don't think Jessica's Will is quite there. I definitely don't think Teferi's Production is quite there. We love talking to you guys, and especially when it's about Magic cards.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of Magic cards, if you want to pick up a Jessica's Will or a Smothering Tithe or a Teferi's Protection, cardkingdom.com/command is the best place to go to get all your Magic products, singles, anything at all. We have Lost Caverns of Ixalan. We have Murders at Karlov Manor coming up very soon. Yeah, either you can pre-order it now or very, very soon. cardkingdom.com/command is just the best retailer on the internet because you get all of your cards from one place and it all arrives on your doorstep all together. Also, this is the time of year where, not in Los Angeles, but everywhere else, weather is happening. And that means that you really don't want amateurs packaging your cards and sending them to your place, because if they don't do it all the time, they might not package it correctly. We've all opened those packages where it's wet, the tape is touching the card, all kinds of stuff. Card Kingdom, they're pros. They do this all the time, day in and day out. They have procedures for it. They've seen everything. They know to package stuff in such a way that I've had stuff arrive in the mailbox. It's rained that day. The package is soaking. I open it up. Sure enough, they've wrapped it in bubble wrap. They've got tape all around it. I open the cards are just fine. And that's good peace of mind. So cardkingdom.com/command.
Yeah, and once those cards are in your hand, they arrived safe. You need to keep them safe. Go to ultrapro.com/command. UltraPro has some of the best, highest quality Magic accessories in the business. They've got great deck boxes. I love their satin cubes specifically, but if you like to carry specific dice for each deck, you can get those satin towers that are super tall, and you get everything all in one place. They have beautiful dice that are big numbers, so it's easy to read over spell table and easy for your opponents across the table. If you just want to decorate your sweet game room, get wall scrolls. They have plushes, and they have stuff for every kind of game. So if you play Magic or anything beyond that, Dungeons and Dragons, Pokemon, they have stuff to support those games as well. We love UltraPro products here, and you can pick them up and support the show at ultrapro.com/command.
Okay, this has been a really long episode.
It has.
Yeah, so, but I do want to do a quick end step.
Yeah.
Because I wore this shirt today.
What is this shirt?
So there is a game called, if you can't see my shirt, it's called Stormgate. So this is a lot of them are ex-Blizzard employees that worked on StarCraft, and they're trying to bring back the RTS, which is a real-time strategy game. And I was a big StarCraft player. You've probably seen me wear like Protoss shirts or hats on the show before. And we had the pleasure to go down and meet some of the devs and play the game a few months ago. It's really, really cool. And they're doing a Kickstarter for it right now. So we'll put the link in the show notes. But if you're a fan of old Warcraft 3, StarCraft 2, League of Legends, and Dota were both birthed from the real-time strategy genre. And it's just a genre that video games has just kind of gone away, and they're trying to bring it back. If you know Day 9, he started doing StarCraft videos and stuff like that. His brother is like one of the biggest StarCraft casters. And anyway, his mom is actually working on the game. She's like in the marketing department or something, and we met her. She's super nice. But the game is super fun, super sweet, and it's just a genre of video game I would love to have come back into the world. So if you're like me, and you like RTS games and you'd love to play, if you've been waiting for StarCraft 3, that's not going to happen probably for a long time, but looks like it's going to be pretty close. Stormgate. Links in the show notes. Go support their Kickstarter.
Very cool.
All right.
Finally, big thank you to our amazing team here, especially the editors at the Command Zone. Thank you to Damon Lenz, Eric Lem, Megan Yip, Gaurav Galati, Jordan Pridgeon, Jamie Block, Arthur Meadowcroft, Manson Lung, Josh Murphy, Jake Boss, Sam Waldo, Evan Limburger, Katie Cole, Mitch Trafford, and, of course,
the ineffable,
yours, Jimmy Wong.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Peace.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.